Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax.
I never even met him. I didn't know his name or face. I was blissfully unaware of his very existence. I will never know why or when it started. I'm glad for that, I guess. I moved into my very small apartment in February of last year. My landlord, Olivia, was a sweet older woman who would cook too much food and bring me leftovers. She was great to me, even after I told her my problem. I'm antisocial, but she didn't mind renting to a reclusive young girl who reminded her of her daughter. Every few weeks, she would knock on my door and then leave, letting me know she was leaving something for me. I loved that. Not even my family would cook so well. The next morning, I wash and leave her empty containers outside my door, and by an hour or so, she would come back and take them away. My other neighbors seemed fine, but I never really talked to them. I work from home, so anytime I was ever forced to go out, I rushed out and into my apartment, avoiding an uncomfortable situation. I loved living alone. It was everything I hoped for. I could just breathe. By April, though, I started noticing things were not right. Things were moving, or plain disappearing. I was convinced it was just anxiety, caused by my new medication and the move. Another side effect was that it made me so drowsy. Since I hated seeing the doctor, I just dealt with it. I took naps during the day now, and eventually stopped caring. That is, until one incident doubled my paranoia. Olivia brought me some sort of Greek tossed salad for lunch one day, and I enjoyed it with my friend, Netflix. I fell asleep in the middle of Portlandia, and I woke up that evening at 5 p.m. per usual. What wasn't usual was that my bedding on the opposite side of me was disturbed. I only sleep on my right side, always. Even more, it felt warm. My first thought was that I must have rolled around a lot, but I knew it was too odd to dismiss. I got up and I searched my apartment, gripping my phone with 911 typed in. Nothing else was disturbed. Everything was exactly like it should be. I let it go. For the next 2 weeks, everything was normal, pardon the occasional misplaced shoe or drawn back shower curtain. I thought about telling someone, my parents, maybe Olivia, but if it's not life or death, I'm not reaching out to anyone. I wasn't scared. I was nervous, perhaps a little stubborn as well, but I stayed. I'm not letting some stupid anxiety ruin my lovely, lonely world. May came, and it was getting worse. My underwear, toothbrush, hell, maybe even my food was being misplaced. Every time I woke up, there was some strange odor in the air. I finally realized this won't go away if I keep ignoring it. I called up my mum, and I begged to come and stay for a few days. When I got home, I told them everything. Saying it out loud solidified any creepy suspicions. That weekend, my dad went to my apartment, and what was found was true horror. Written all over the walls was, "Come back, baby, please." He ran out and called the police. There was no one living in my apartment, but someone definitely had access besides me. The investigation revealed a man, Henry, the son of my landlord Olivia, was in a projected relationship with me. They showed me his confession on tape. He admitted coming into my apartment every night and every day with his mother's extra key. He claimed that we were in love and that he had my permission. He drugged his mother's food that she left out for me, which of course caused my drowsiness. And he would let himself in, watch me sleep, touch my hair, and kiss my shoulder. The leftovers in the fridge were tested and confirmed that suspicion. I was absolutely horrified and disgusted. A man I never knew existed collected my hair, clothes, and trash, and practically lived in my apartment for 4 months. My mum, brother, and I had finally arrived at my grandmother's house after a very boring 7-hour drive. It was a trip we made every year, but not usually around this time. We'd always usually visit around Christmas, but this time it was October, the 18th to be exact. What seemed like 50 or more pumpkins with carved faces adorned my grandma's porch. Halloween has always been my favourite holiday, so I was excited to see that my grandma had made such an effort to celebrate the occasion. We unloaded the car and made our way up the creaking stairs into the near 50-year-old house that my grandparents had built. We were met immediately with the smell of freshly baked apple pie and my grandmother giving us all hugs. She told us not to get too comfortable because we would be taking a small walk down the street. I thought it was rather strange that she wanted to go on a walk, seeing as it was already getting dark around this time. But I didn't want to appear rude, so I just nodded my head and replied, "Okay, sounds good." She led us down the gravel driveway, and we began walking down the street. The neighborhood itself was in disrepair, and there were a number of vacant and decaying houses. We had ventured a couple of blocks when she stopped in front of a 2-story, obviously abandoned house with a green roof. The place looked like it should almost be considered condemned, as it didn't look safe to even go in. It was a white house, but it had dirt and mud seemingly caked all over the outside, and the wooden porch looked ready to collapse at any time. I could see a few other people arriving to the property on foot, when my grandmother announced to us that it was actually a haunted house that had been set up by a man living in the neighborhood for Halloween. She said it was the first night that the house would be open to the public, and that it should be opening any moment, as it was now completely dark outside. A huge grin spread across my face. I loved haunted houses, even the ones that are just for entertainment purposes and are not actually haunted. Almost immediately after she'd finished talking, a tall, grungy-looking man exited the house and asked everyone to gather at the front porch. He then proceeded to inform us that he would be leading us into the house and to follow him. We all complied and began walking up the dilapidated steps into the home. We were met by an extremely nauseating stench. I don't really know how to describe it, other than it was the most god-awful, overpowering, eye-watering inducing smell I had ever encountered. We continued following the man. He appeared to be leading us downstairs and into the basement. I remember thinking that was strange, as this was supposed to be a haunted house, not a haunted basement. He threw open the door to the basement, and the smell that I had previously thought was the worst smell my nose had ever had the misfortune to breathe in now seemed like nothing more than child's play. There were a couple of people who even began to gag at the smell. We couldn't see much of anything inside, at least not yet. The man flipped a switch that dimly lit the room. This basement seemed larger than any basement I'd ever seen. We made our way all the way down the stairs and just stopped in the middle of the room. The man then put his arm out and sort of pointed towards the wall and began to turn in a circle, as if to profoundly display what he was hanging on the walls. There were fake dead bodies hung on crucifixes all over the walls. My mum moved closer to inspect, and I moved with her. She got very close to one of the bodies, and moved her hand to touch the corpse's hand. I remember the look on her face after touching it. She seemed terrified. She grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and ran towards the door, shoving the rest of my family in front of her and pushing us up the stairs and out of the door. I could hear, as we were running to the front door, the rest of the people that entered with us now also quickly exiting the room. Once outside, my mum whipped out her phone and dialed 911, as did seemingly all the other people in the group, as they also pulled out their cell phones. The police seemed to arrive almost instantaneously. They must have had a car nearby or something. They entered the house and walked out with the man in handcuffs. Other police cars had arrived by this point, enough so that they lined the entire block. They ended up taking the man away in a car, and a few officers stayed behind to take written statements from the people who had entered the house. I later found out that the man's name was Donald Van. He was a serial killer who they had been searching for almost 10 years, and the bodies in the house were very much real. I sometimes wonder if we were meant to be his next victims, or if he was just proudly showing off his work to us. One thing I do know though, is that I'll never forget that smell. It's almost like it's burned into my nose. My dad grew up in rural farm country and had to walk about half a mile to and from a bus stop each day. He was the youngest of 5, and he was in his last year of elementary school, while his siblings were in either middle or high school. This meant he went to the same bus stop as his siblings, but they were picked up and dropped off by the bus at different times. My grandma was a single mum who worked as a nurse and couldn't pick him up, but my aunts and uncles usually took good care of him. There was rarely trouble in my dad's county, besides small things like teens taking tractors out for joyrides. One day, when he was walking home on a stretch of country road on my family's property, he saw a van whiz by him. My grandma's family often let locals drive through as a sort of shortcut, so my dad wasn't too alarmed. That all changed when he realized that the van had pulled in a ways up the road. My dad looked inside the van as he passed it and saw a gruff, bug-eyed older man. My dad said the look in his eyes was unsettling, like an excited shark setting sight on its prey. "Mister, what are you doing on our farm?" The old man got out of his car and gave my dad some spiel about how his parents had got into a car crash and my dad needed to go with him to the hospital. Alarm bells went off for one single reason. His parents were divorced and his dad lived 2 states away. His parents couldn't stand to be around each other, much less in the same car unless it was an absolute necessity. Thinking quick, my dad then asked, "Did you take my brother Ricky there already?" The old man told my dad, "Oh yeah, I picked Ricky up from school and took him right away." My dad didn't have a brother Ricky. He ran towards his house, cutting across the forest. The old man followed behind on foot, yelling at my dad. My dad was just about to give out from exhaustion when he reached the driveway to his house. He saw that his mum wasn't even home and got scared that the man would try to come inside when he saw his Uncle Buck standing on the porch, cleaning his favorite rifle. This struck my dad as odd because his mum had told him that Uncle Buck had gone on vacation and my dad hadn't seen him in months. He screamed, "Uncle Buck, that man's trying to get me in his car." Now, Uncle Buck was a scary-looking guy. He was a World War II vet with Willie Nelson braids and a ZZ Top beard. He was a biker who drank whiskey and smoked cigars and won plenty of bar fights. Definitely the kind of guy you don't mess with. He didn't say anything as my dad ran inside the house. my dad watched from his bedroom window as Uncle Buck put his rifle together real quick and yelled something at the man. The old man narrowed his eyes, spun around and hightailed it back. It took my dad a few minutes to calm down before he went back down to the porch to talk to Uncle Buck. But when he went there, he couldn't find Uncle Buck anywhere. When his siblings and Mum got home, he told them exactly what happened. According to my dad, his Mum went whiter than a sheet and asked him if he was sure that it was Uncle Buck. Well, sure. He was even wearing that motorcycle jacket he got for his birthday. His Mum didn't say anything for a few hours. That night, after dinner, my grandmother explained to my dad that Uncle Buck had died in a motorcycle crash a few months earlier in Florida, and that they buried him in those exact clothes. The rifle that my dad had seen him cleaning was kept under lock and key in my grandma's basement. When Uncle Buck died, they couldn't find the keys anywhere, so the case remained locked. When my grandma went to check the case, it was unlocked and unlatched. My father still doesn't know what to make of this, but I've got to thank Uncle Buck for saving my dad's life. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. So, basically, my boyfriend and I live in a flat together, and he's an area manager for a main chain restaurant in England. His job takes him to at least 5 to 8 stores, and sometimes he has to stay late. Sometimes he doesn't get in until around 3 AM, so I usually sort of wait up for him to make sure he's alright, if he wants me to run him a hot bath, and if he wants a coffee or anything. So, I get the usual phone call from him saying, "I'm on my way home. I'll be home in an hour. If I drop call you when I'm closer, can you get a bath running for me, please?" I say sure and hang up. Now, our block of flats has this security door that always gets locked at 10 PM, and as long as you have a main entry key, you're free to come and go without worrying about the door. I'm nestling down to watch some Netflix, with a cup of tea and a cheeky biscuit, when I hear our buzzer to our flat go off. Now, someone outside the main entrance is pressing my number, and I have to press a switch from the inside of my flat that will open the main security door and let them in. I think to myself, it's probably just someone who's forgotten their key and pressed my number quickly. I try to shrug it off. I pause the film I'm watching, and I wait. The buzzer rings again, stops, and then rings again. It sounds like someone is deliberately putting their finger on it and holding it down. Now, our flat is on the second floor, and from our bedroom, we can look down and see who's at the main gate. I jump up, go into the room, and slowly peek to see who's there. I saw 5 well-built, stocky men. This is 2 AM. What the hell are they doing here? Why the hell are they ringing my buzzer? It suddenly becomes clear to me that whoever they were, they clearly didn't live here because they didn't have a key. While peeking at them, I clearly see the front guy put his hand up and press my buzzer. Flat number 4. He's not even touching the other buttons, just mine. Half of me wants to pick up my flat phone and be like, "Seriously, get lost. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I will call the police." And then the other half of me doesn't want to give away that I'm a girl. It sounds silly, but I'm 23 and I'm quite small. I grab my phone and I ring my boyfriend straight away. He says something like he's 45 minutes away and will be there as soon as possible, but he will call his dad, Luke, who's a policeman, to come over and wait with me. While I'm on the phone, the buzzer is still going. He tells me to just keep peeking at them and to see if I can make out any distinguishing features. After what seemed like ages, my boyfriend's dad turns up, and I see him walk straight up to the guys and start a conversation. My boyfriend's dad already has a security key. We gave him one in case we were ever locked out, and he opens up the door to my flat. Straight away, he runs over to me and makes sure I'm fine. We're sitting down, having a cup of tea, and I ask him what was said and what was happening outside. He says he walked up to the main door, and the conversation went like this. They said to him, "Hey man, do you live here? Do you think you could let us in?" Luke replied with, "Well, clearly if you don't have a key, you don't live here, so no. Who are you supposed to be seeing?" "Well, my main girl lives in number 4, and she's gone to sleep." You know how late it is. "These are my friends, and they don't have anywhere to stay, and I haven't got a key. So, how about you let us in?" That's funny, because my daughter lives there. "Oh yeah? Shit, dude. Well, how about letting us in and we can go and see her together?" Luke said, "Right. Now I don't know what you're planning to do, but seriously, stay the fuck away from these flats. You clearly don't live here. If you ever come here again, I will personally arrest each and every one of you wankers. Now fuck off and go home, because I swear to God I will beat the shit out of you guys so bad, no one will recognize you." And with that, the group of guys took off, and Luke managed to open the door freely and get in.
My daughter's been trying to warn me for weeks. I really should have listened. "Daddy? I think there's a monster in the attic." I gave my daughter a tired smile. It was the best I could do at this point. She'd been doing this for weeks now. Every night I'd come and tuck her in, switch the nightlight on and kiss her goodnight, when she would pull the blanket tight under her chin and tell me about the monster living in the attic of our house. Eyes wide, lips quivering, she would shake her little head furiously and insist that she could not possibly go to sleep until I got up and checked. It wouldn't matter how much I tell her that it's all just in her head, and that monsters aren't real. If I don't check the attic, she'd wake up screaming and crying just past midnight, every single time. It's not like her fears were completely baseless, as we had all been hearing odd skittering noises coming from up there at night. Probably rats. No monsters that light-footed. "Please, Daddy, could you go and check?" she whispered, afraid that the thing upstairs would eavesdrop and get mad at her request. "Okay," I replied. There was no harm in indulging this little quirk of hers for at least a little longer. After all, the day when she would stop asking me to check for monsters and slam the door shut on my face wasn't all that far away. I just wished it wasn't the attic, though. Why can't the damn thing live in her closet like a normal monster? Like a bored robot carrying out its daily task, I trudged out of her room, yawning as I reached the attic door, before sliding the ladder down and climbing up, one rickety rung at a time. I popped my head into the cramped space, slipped my phone out of my pocket and turned on its flashlight. Motes of dust shivered in the pale glow cast by the phone which illuminated the attic. Cardboard boxes covered in tattered rags. My wife's old easel and some broken furniture filled up the tiny attic, but no monsters. "All right, honey," I said after coming back down to my daughter's room. "I've checked. No monsters again tonight. Maybe we'll find them tomorrow." She grinned, relieved. "Thank you, Daddy. Good night, love." "Good night." Groaning and rubbing the crick in my neck, I entered our bedroom and plopped down on the bed belly first, mushing my face into the pillow. "Is Daddy back from fighting monsters?" my wife asked, slight mirth dancing in her tired voice. I grunted. "Yep." Kicked its little ass and sent it scurrying back to hell. She chuckled. and then turned over to the other side, her back facing me. I shut my eyes and got ready to go to sleep when I was rudely interrupted by the critters in the attic skittering around like kids hopped up on candy. Freaking bastards with their little rat paws slapping against the wooden flooring of the attic. "Babe, you really need to get rid of those rats." I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. "Yeah, tomorrow." She sighed and shrugged her shoulders. Soon her breathing slowed down as she fell asleep. I wanted to follow her into the dream world, but my stiff neck wouldn't allow me to do so. I tossed and turned, before finally realizing I'd have to lie on my back if I were to have any shot at catching some sleep. And I hated doing that. I hadn't slept on my back in ages, but the ache in my neck forced me. And then that damn skittering again. Heck. I rubbed my forehead, wiggled my shoulders, and opened my eyes. And saw who? No. What had been making that noise for all those weeks? Up on the ceiling, I spotted a figure. White, but hidden by the dark. I froze. What the heck? It shifted, and there was that sound again, like claws scratching wood. My heart beat faster and my body erupted in sweat. What the heck? What the heck? Hands trembling, I reached for my phone and gently swung it around, shining the light on the figure on the ceiling. The light fell upon a face, old, wrinkled, framed by matted locks of white hair that flowed down like the aerial roots of an ancient tree. It was an old woman, dressed in white, leering down at me, her fingers digging into the wood of the ceiling. I gasped, and the grinning woman turned and crawled out of the room, moving across the ceiling like a messed up spider woman, before disappearing into the hallway outside. I jumped out of the bed and ran out into the hallway, letting my eyes scan each and every inch of the walls outside. But there was no one there. It was like she had disappeared. I would have almost believed that I had dreamt it all up if I hadn't noticed the long claw marks on the ceiling and felt my stomach drop. And that's when I finally understood that for all those weeks that we had been hearing those sounds, it wasn't some rats skittering around. It was that woman, looking down at our sleeping bodies, watching, grinning.
I was 19, staying late at the college darkroom to develop some film for my photography class. The photography building, once a tobacco warehouse, was a dark, rickety hulk near some lonely railroad tracks in a little travelled part of campus. I finished developing my film close to midnight and headed out, nervous as always to be alone at night in this deserted part of town. It was dark. Several of the streetlights around the parking lot were out, and the few that remained were phoning it in, putting out a weak flickery light that did nothing to reassure me as I headed towards my car. I heard him before I saw him. A scrape of feet on asphalt. He said, "Hey, can you do me a favor?" I startled and dropped my keys, and he mumbled an apology for scaring me. I noticed he was wearing a jogging suit and was walking with a limp. "What do you need?" I asked. He hobbled a step or two towards me. "I think I sprained my ankle. Could you take me to the emergency room?" The university hospital was a short distance down the road. I hesitated. The guy looked perfectly pleasant, and he did seem to be in pain. But I had recently finished a book about a serial killer called Ted Bundy, who lured some of his victims by pretending to have a broken arm and asking for their help carrying books to his car. When they leaned over to put his stuff in the passenger seat of his VW Bug, he knocked them unconscious with a crowbar and stuffed them inside. This scene played across my mind as I looked at the guy. It also occurred to me to wonder why the hell anyone would want to jog in this creepy part of town. So I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that, but I could call someone for you. There's a phone in the photography building there." "There's nobody to call," I just moved here. I don't really know anybody. Can't you just drive me? It's right down Limestone Avenue." He leaned against the car and winced as he reached down to rub his ankle. I offered to call an ambulance for him. "No, I can't afford that. I don't have health insurance. Can't you just drive me? I'll pay you $20. There was something in the way he said this last bit. Something wrong. Like that exercise in my acting class, where we had to recite "Mary Had a Little Lamb," as though we were delivering a tragic monologue or a furious rant. There was a tone rising up that didn't quite match the words he was saying. A raw urgency that reached down inside me and hit the panic button hard. There was a moment of silence between us. "I can't help you," I said. "I'm leaving." I gripped my keys, slipped them between my fingers the way my mum had taught me, so I could use them as a weapon if he came at me. I kept my eyes on him as I speed walked the last few feet to my car. He watched me drive away, still leaning against the car, a flat expression on his face. Away from the dark parking lot, driving through campus with my music turned on, the fear faded. I started to feel a little guilty for leaving the guy there, although I knew I'd done the thing that my mum and dad would have wanted me to do. I was about to turn into my dorm parking lot when I realized I needed to pick up some stuff for my breakfast the next morning. So I turned around and headed back in the direction I'd come. About a minute down the road, my stomach clenched. There was the guy in the jogging suit, running along the sidewalk. His ankle was perfectly fine. Later that summer, 2 students at my college were attacked by those same railroad tracks. The girl survived, but her boyfriend died. The man who attacked them was a serial killer, dubbed the Railroad Killer by the police. He murdered dozens of people across several states, most of them near railroad tracks. I didn't see his mugshot on TV until years later, but the picture broke me out in the same icy sweat I felt when I saw that guy running down the street. I can't be 100% positive, but my gut tells me I escaped a serial killer that night. I'm from the Netherlands, and last year, my friends and I were having a party. I use the word party very loosely. It was just a few stupid 18-year-old dudes getting drunk at one of our friends' places. His family's rich, lived in the rice bike, and had a house with a good-sized garden. So, when we were hanging at this guy's place, we always had a blast. Eric, the guy whose place we were hanging at, suggested that we explore the deep web together. He had downloaded Tor and had been looking around on it for the past couple of days, and figured it would be fun, just for laughs. Most of us hadn't even heard of the deep web before, so when he explained to us what it was, our drunken asses were totally in. So he shows us all of the common sites that you've probably heard of. After a while, we started going off-road and looking for some obscure, crazy things. We found people selling drugs, a bunch of those hitmen services which looked pretty fake, even a site where you could have a box full of actual shit mailed to someone. That one was particularly funny at the time. Still sort of is. We came across a site in Dutch that was selling animals. Not crazy, exotic animals, but like cats and dogs. Okay, that's pretty weird. Why would you need to be selling such normal pets on the deep web? We were about to click off and find something more interesting when a chat box popped up on the screen, asking us what sort of animal we were looking for and if we needed any help. Drunk off our asses, we decided to play along with this random guy who must have run the site. And since he sold dogs, we typed to him in English, "Can you send a bunch of bitches around to my place ASAP?" Our country is highly proficient in English, so he definitely understood our innuendo. He told us to stop wasting his time and to get off the site. We decided to ask a legitimate question. Why are you selling cats and dogs on the deep web? The guy's response really surprised us. as we didn't see it coming. He told us that all of the pets for sale on the site were stolen from their previous owners and then sold on for profit. The guys behind the site would go around to people's houses, wait for their dogs to be let out into the yard, steal their designer pets, and then sell them at a major discount. We asked him why he did it, and he said it was surprisingly lucrative. Since some breeds can be really expensive and sought after, there was a lot of demand. They also stole cats, which he said were much easier to get a hold of, since owners kept much less of an eye on them. What was our response to this? Well, we were drunk, so we started calling him an arsehole. He didn't respond well to this, calling us pussies and saying we'd never say such a thing to his face. He wasn't eloquent or anything, he just typed like some sort of thug. At one point, Eric, who was typing, was saying that if the guy had any pets of his own, he would realize how messed up what he was doing was, and that he'd fuck up anyone he caught trying to steal his cat. There was a slight pause before the guy simply replied, "Okay, I'm coming to get it, and you won't catch me." Bullshit, we all thought. Firstly, what are the frigging odds that this jerk-off would ever do anything? On top of that, what are the odds that he even lives close by enough for it to be worth his while? So we figured, screw it. We kept berating him and calling him an arsehole in a variety of ways. After a while, he stopped responding with his empty threats, and just went silent. We kept typing, but since he wasn't responding anymore, we got bored quickly. A week or so passed, and I get a call from Eric that chilled me to the damn bone. Turns out that the guy's threats weren't so empty after all. His mum had gone to let the family cat, Cubus, into the house the night before, but it was nowhere to be seen. She figured that it just wanted to stay out for the night, so the family went to bed and thought no more about it. The next morning, when she opened the front door, right there on the doorstep was Cubus, almost totally skinned. It may have taken them a while longer to realize that the bloody mess was their cat, had the skin and fur of the tail not been left on as to help them identify it. The guy must have traced Eric's IP address, located his house, waited to find out which cat was his, and then caught it when no one else was watching. Maybe he was planning on stealing it, but figured that the breed wasn't worth taking, so he'd just send a message instead. We also don't know whether he really did live close by, or got someone else to do his dirty work. The thought of him living close by is pretty horrifying, as is the thought that he was watching Eric's house, or at least someone was. We didn't fully realize who we were messing with. Sorry, Cubus.
A few years ago, more like 10 years ago, I used to be big into visiting weird websites. I had a lot of time on my hand, due to not playing sports, nor did I volunteer for anything at all in high school. I told my friend Mark that I was starting to get bored. Honestly, I was bored with what I was experiencing on these websites. He said I should go on the deep web. He and I used to go on the deep web, but never found anything. So I decided to search through some more stuff, a little deeper. I searched for hours every day for about 2.5 months. Still nothing that I hadn't seen already. I told Mark, and of course he said just visit the dark web. When I did go on the dark web, I saw chat rooms, all with different names. I came across one named I, as in EYE. It was all in caps. I entered the chat, but before entering the live chat, you are assigned a number. Mine was P34. I confirmed my number and entered. There were hundreds of people. The comments were coming in quick. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. The screen was black, then a name popped up on the screen. It said Mr. Wiggles. The comments immediately stopped and a voice came over my speakers. Welcome, P34. Then his name disappeared off of the screen and the comments continued, everyone giving me welcomes. A few minutes go by, then a countdown from 10 pops up on the screen. Then the chat goes crazy. Once it reached the number 1, the screen went straight to what looks like a view from a camera just watching someone in what looks like at their home. I sat there watching this for 20 minutes and nothing happened, so I shut down my computer. The next day I went to school, had a normal day, went to Walmart, then I went home. I decided to go back on the same chat from before. I confirmed my number P34 and again, there were hundreds of people commenting. Mr. Wiggles popped up and just like before, the comments stopped. Across the screen it said, "No new members tonight." Then the countdown started again. Everyone in the chat started going wild. The countdown finished and then it was showing the point of view from a camera again. But it was outside of the school. My school from earlier that day. At that point I was intrigued. I couldn't tell if it was focused on a certain person or just watching the school. After 30 minutes of watching the video, our school bell rang and everyone started to come outside while whoever was recording was positioned across the street in the car. Once everyone came out, the person got out of the car and started to follow a crowd of kids. Everyone started to split from each other, and the person recording started to follow someone. It was my friend Mark. He had to be at least 100 feet behind him. I started to call Mark, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him as I watched the video, but nothing. The person followed him to his house and sat outside of his house for a few minutes. The man behind the camera finally said, "No parents are home." And he began to walk to Mark's house, rang the doorbell, and waited as he continued to record. A few seconds go by, and Mark opened the door. He looked confused and the guy said, "P34 sent me." And Mark looked afraid, then the camera shut off and everyone in the chat left. So I did too. I called Mark's house phone instead of his cell phone, and his mother answered. I asked for Mark and she said that she thought he was with me. I panicked. I then received a notification on my phone from my Gmail account. It said the sender was Mr. Wiggles. The message was, "I'm getting closer, P34. Mark says hi." I was shocked and didn't know what to do, so I called the cops. They didn't do anything about it because the email disappeared. I haven't been on the dark web since and no one has seen Mark. Still to this day I receive messages with pictures of me in random places along with the same written message that said, "It can happen anytime." I honestly wish I never went on the dark web.
My money situation hasn't been the best lately. With rent and bills to pay, it's been a struggle. In my attempt to make ends meet though, I met someone I wish I hadn't. A few nights ago, I saw an ad on Craigslist looking for someone to help move a few large items and boxes up from the basement. The job offered $12 an hour cash and estimated to be around 5 to 7 hours worth of work. That sounded great to me, and best of all, it was within walking distance of my house. I emailed the poster of the ad, and everything seemed great at first. He was thankful that someone had answered so quickly, because he really needed to get things done. After a few emails though, he hits me with something. "I want you to know that I'm a gay man. How old are you, by the way?" That's a weird message to send. His sexuality should be none of my business. If you call up a plumber to come to your house, you don't share that information with him. I'm a 28-year-old guy though. I'm in good shape, and I never leave the house without a knife in my boot and a sidearm on my waist. I need the money, and this guy's 68. If he tries anything, I'm confident I can handle myself. Besides that, I like to think the best of people. I try and tell myself that maybe he's just a bit flamboyant and has had trouble in the past hiring people who turned out to be homophobic. The time comes and I get to his house. He comes off as a normal and pleasant dude right from the bat. He's polite and friendly and has a really cool house. It's your typical middle-class New England home from the early 40s. Not something I'd want to live in because you're so closed off with smaller rooms, but they have a nice charm. He's even furnished it with antiques from the time period. So, I'm put a little at ease with everything going so well at first. He takes me down into the basement, and it is a bit creepy. Let's be honest here, most basements are. Even more so when it belongs to a stranger. He shows me what needs to be done, and I start getting to work. Everything goes fine for the first hour or so. Then I notice out of the corner of my eye, he's watching me from around the corner. I try and tell myself it's no big deal. He just wants to make sure I'm not stealing any of his stuff, and that I'm doing what I'm supposed to. After a few minutes, he goes away. About 30 minutes later, he comes strolling in wearing nothing but underwear and socks. "Oh, sorry," he says. "I was just about to take a shower and I forgot to tell you a few things." Well, that wasn't really the case, as he just repeats something he told me earlier. He's 68 though. Can't expect him to remember everything, right? A little more time goes by, and he calls me from upstairs and tells me to come and take a break and have a glass of water. Sounds good to me. I get upstairs, walk into the living room, and he's sitting on the couch, completely naked. I freeze a bit, and he says, "Is this okay with you?" I told him that I already informed him I was straight, and if this is what he was looking for, he hired the wrong person. He starts apologizing and puts his little buddy away and begs me to please finish the job, saying that he didn't mean to make me feel uncomfortable. Again, I need the money, so I agree. I figure there's no way this guy could overpower me, and he has no idea I'm carrying. I get back to work, and everything's fine for another couple of hours. I go back upstairs once the job's done to let him know. He tells me no problem, and to have a seat while he goes and gets the money. I sit down and take out my phone to browse the internet while I wait. After a few minutes, I just know he's right next to me. It's something most people always manage to realize. I don't know the science behind it, if there is any. I didn't consciously see or hear anything, but maybe your brain picks up on little cues subconsciously. Either way, I turn behind me, and there he is, dick out, going to town on it. I admit I freeze a bit from the shock of it. He reaches out and puts his hand on my shoulder. Now, this is probably what creeped me out the most. With his hand on my shoulder, he leans in a little towards me, smiles and says, "Now, don't go and tell anyone what you've just seen, okay? This is just our little secret. Nobody needs to know about it, right?" That's not a line that should come to your mind if a 28-year-old is your normal victim. That's the kind of thing you get used to saying after doing shit like this to fucking kids. At that point, I jumped up, told him to give me the money he owes me, and started towards the door. He hands me the money while still jerking off, and says again, "Don't forget, it's our secret." A few hours pass, and I receive an email from him. "Thank you for what you did for me today. I feel as though we bonded and connected on a very special level. This was a wonderful day I'll never forget. I have more work for you tomorrow. Maybe you'll learn to enjoy watching me share my private moments with you." I didn't respond.
Even though I'm a big coward when it comes to anything scary, this has to be the perfect place to share a terrifying incident that involved my cousins and myself about 15 years ago. At the time this happened, I was approaching my 16th birthday. My family had a big reunion every year in Southern California. Since I hadn't attended since I was little, my parents thought it would be a fun way to spend my summer break. It would also be a great opportunity to get to know my cousins. There was 3 of them, and they were all girls around my age. After I thought about it, it sounded fun, so I agreed and flew out the next month to Los Angeles. The reunion was held at the same hotel we were all staying in. When I arrived there, I was met by my cousins, Jennifer, Belinda, and Stormy. It was amazing how much alike we all looked. We all had long blonde hair and blue eyes, not to mention our facial similarities, but it made sense since our dads were brothers. The biggest difference was how tan they were. Since I had been inside all winter in Minnesota, they were much darker than me. My uncle and dad decided to let us stay in one room together. It was a big fancy bridal suite. When we saw the room, we came up with this joke that we were sisters and we were staying in the hotel together for my bachelorette party. I was chosen as the bachelorette because I was the oldest and looked a little different, like an older sister often does. We spent the rest of the day at the pool and talking to guys. Stormy, who was only 14, managed to trick a 25-year-old guy into thinking she was 19 and gave her his number. We were having so much fun, we stayed up until about 4 talking and laughing. In the morning, which was about noon for most of us, we ordered breakfast and then headed for the pool again. Our day turned out to be even more fun than the one before it. This time, Stormy got a pair of twins to buy her lunch. That girl was on fire that week. Later that evening, we all got dolled up and had dinner at the hotel's restaurant. But this time, the story we'd created had taken on a life of its own. My cousins had been telling guys all day that we were there to party and asking them to buy them drinks. But most of the men were wise enough to know that they were lying. After dinner, we joined this cute pair of older guys that were sitting in the lobby. When they noticed us leaving the restaurant, they had asked us to sit with them, and since we had nothing else to do, we did. Once we had sat down, they began asking us our ages and names. Of course, we lied and said we were in our early 20s, and they actually believed us. I couldn't help but giggle a bit. This was the most fun I'd had in years. Jennifer and I didn't say much. We left that to Belinda and Stormy. At one point, Stormy invited them up to our room, but I had to take her aside and remind her that her dad was staying in the room next to ours and would surely not like it. I didn't want to be a stick in the mud, but I wasn't comfortable with having 2 strange men who looked to be like 30 or something in our room. At the point it was approaching midnight, I told the 2 younger girls it was time to go back to our room, and they argued at first. But once Jennifer backed me up, they gave in. We told the guys to meet us at the pool around 11 a.m. and we get lunch together. Then we went back upstairs to our room. We stayed up talking about the 2 men and what we were planning on doing when we saw them. That lasted until about 2 a.m. when we decided to go to bed. The lights had just been turned off in the room when we all heard the doorknob start jiggling very fast, like somebody was trying to get in. At first, I thought it was my mind tricking me, but once it started again, I got scared. I asked the other girls if they were also hearing it, and they said yes. Without thinking, Belinda jumped up from her bed and said she would see who it was. I yelled out to her to stop her from opening the door, but it was too late. Jennifer got up and turned on the lights, and I joined her at the end of the hall. When Belinda opened the door, she turned to us and said no one was there, then turned back to the door and stepped out into the hall. That was when we saw a person in a black mask jump out and grab her. As soon as they grabbed her, she began screaming and fighting to get away. By this time, Stormy had joined Jennifer and I. All 3 of us were also screaming and running for the door to help Belinda. When we made it out into the hall, we saw that the person was attempting to drag her to the elevator. Even though she was fighting as hard as she could, she was losing and getting closer to the elevator. Thankfully, my uncle came out of his room to see what was going on and saw Belinda being dragged away. He didn't hesitate to attack the person in the mask. Once he hit them a few times across the head, they dropped her and ran off down the hall. They made it to the stairwell and disappeared. We all ran to her to see if she was okay. She was obviously scared and upset, but thankfully didn't look to be hurt. Once he was sure she was all right, my uncle called hotel security and told them what had just happened, and they called the police. The 4 of us girls just sat there and held each other and cried. We were all so happy that Belinda was safe. Despite the hotel's attempt at catching the person by locking all the doors, the attacker still managed to get away. When the police arrived, we tried our best to describe the attacker, but since they were wearing all black and a mask, we didn't have much to go on. Belinda was pretty sure it was a man, but that was it. Over the rest of the week, we all spoke to the police several times and repeated what we had been doing the past couple of days. When my uncle heard about our little inside joke about being in town for a bachelor party and how we had been lying to the boys about our ages, he was mad, to say the least. The police told him that one of those boys was most likely the one that had grabbed Belinda. His theory was that they were trying to kidnap one of us to potentially sell us to a trafficker. Since we looked so much alike, it didn't matter which one of us opened the door. He said girls that looked like us were super popular in the rest of the world and that traffickers would pay top dollar for one of us. We were all so scared we spent the rest of the week in our room and refused to answer the door for anyone without a key. As soon as the police said it was okay for me to go home, I took the first flight back to Minnesota. I was still scared of strangers for a long time and had to go to counseling to get over the worst of it. From what my cousins told me later, they did also and found it hard to trust boys that they had just met. Unfortunately, the police were never able to find Belinda's attacker and punish him for what he had done. It had been a long time since this happened, and when we have taken family trips to Disneyland, I've caught myself wondering if one of the men walking around could be the one that tried to kidnap Belinda that night. Then I get a shiver down my spine and remember it could have just as easily been me.
So, I've heard similar stories, and I figured I should share my story and see what other people's take on this is. Because to this day, I'm still baffled by this experience. Anyway, I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, but I had flown out to Los Angeles for the weekend. My friends put on a yearly music festival at a biker bar out around Joshua Tree. Just a relatively small thing compared to Coachella and the like, where most of the attendees are also musicians and everyone knows each other. So, we drink. Heavily. For 3 days or so. By the end of it, you tend to need at least a week to recover. So, I was flying back to Texas, wildly hungover and miserable and completely drained. I had a flight from LA to Dallas, and then a quick hop to Austin from there. I was seated by the window, on the left side, where there are only 2 seats. Seated in the aisle seat was a middle-aged woman, totally unremarkable, just your average Texan mum. We made polite small talk for a few minutes, but I really felt like doing nothing but curling up into a ball against the wall and passing out. So, shortly after takeoff, I put in my headphones and started watching a movie on my iPod until I fell asleep. Throughout the movie, I thought I noticed her trying to look over my shoulder and watch the movie too, and then mumbling something like, "Oh great, just ignore me." This happened several more times, but I convinced myself that I was just misreading her. Eventually, I noticed her furiously scribbling writing in the margins of a beat-up leather-bound book. I kept peeking over at it, noticing that the entire book was filled with unintelligible chicken scratch in pretty much every bit of the available space in the margins. I also noticed it was an Alcoholics Anonymous book. Whatever, I thought. Just someone with some issues. I eventually fell asleep. I woke up as we were landing in Dallas. People started getting off the plane. The lady makes zero effort to start packing her things up or get ready to go. She keeps sitting there, scribbling in her book. As I said, I'm wildly hungover and kind of cranky, and I have no patience for anything that's prolonging the time that I have to spend on this airplane. It gets to our row, and it's her turn to move into the aisle. And again, she does not move at all. The rows behind us now start to leave. I finally say, "Hey, I've got a connection to catch, so I have to get moving here," gesturing towards the aisle and standing up. She laughs, shakes her head, looks up at me and goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. You're not going anywhere. I was confused. My mind was not at its sharpest that day. I responded with, I assure you, I am going somewhere. I'm getting off this plane, now. She shook her head again and said, but you promised me you would never leave me. Now other people who are leaving the plane are also looking over at this exchange, also baffled, and I make eye contact with a few people, giving them that, can you believe this look? I begin edging my way out of the row, saying, I certainly never said that. I'm leaving now. As I edged past, she sighed and said, well, I guess I gotta go with you then. At which point, she stands up behind me, leaving her purse and book and all her belongings on the plane, and follows me out. All through the tunnel, and through the terminal, and up the escalator, this woman follows at my heels, grinning like a madwoman the entire time. I'm walking fast, but she's right on my heels. I didn't say anything at first, and my mind just kept saying, why is this happening now, of all the days? I just did not want to deal with whatever the hell breakdown this woman was having, not with the way I was feeling. I eventually get to the waiting area for the monorail to the next terminal, where my connecting flight is, and she slides up right next to me, still grinning. At this point, I say, all right, seriously, why are you following me like this? Her response this time, because I love you, and you promised me you would never be apart from me. I laughed nervously, and looked around at the strangers, also waiting for the train, making sure I loudly announced, no, I did not promise that. I have no idea who you are. The train arrives. I get on it, and obviously, she follows. Now she's trying to hold my hand. I'm moving around the monorail car, texting the girl I was seeing at the time about what was going on, and how I'm actually kind of terrified by this woman. My phone was at 1% though, and it died before I could get a response. I was actually starting to get severely creeped out by this woman. Her eyes were completely vacant. There was just nothing but emptiness in her stare. She didn't even blink. Coupled with her unyielding grin, I was becoming sure it was only a matter of time before she snapped and proceeded to stab me or shove me down an escalator or something. She's still grabbing at my hand and following me as I shove around the tiny train car, and I announce to the other strangers, I have no idea who this woman is. Seriously, can anyone get a hold of security or something? Everyone responded with silence. I guess nobody else wanted to deal with this either. I felt like I was becoming the crazy one now, making random statements to a train full of strangers. We finally get to the other terminal. I near run to my gate, with her right behind me still, saying things like, you can't get away from me this time. I get to the gate and spend a moment scanning the crowd. I see a woman in what looked like a police uniform waiting, and I say, excuse me, are you security or police or something? You see, this lady is... But she just shakes her head at me. Everyone in the crowd just does their best to ignore us. You would be amazed at how hard it is to find security or police in a damned airport these days when you really need them. Finally, I go up to the desk and shamelessly interrupt the agent standing there. Doing my best to maintain composure, I put on a half smile and explain to them, hi there. So this woman standing right next to me here, I have no idea who she is, and she's been following me for quite some time. Both the agents laugh. The male one makes a comment like, oh, long vacation, huh? Seriously, what can I help you with? The crazy lady laughed with them, rolling her eyes at my absurd assertion that I didn't know her. I chuckled, shook my head, and said again, no, I mean it. I have no idea who this woman is. They finally saw the desperation in my eyes and the seriousness of my tone, and their smiles faded. Can we see your boarding passes? I handed him mine. She produced hers from her pocket as I continued explaining. She was on my previous flight. She even left her purse on that plane, all the way in the other terminal. The agents speak with themselves off to the side for a moment, while I completely ignore this woman, just swatting away her hand as she tries to hold mine for the 100th time. The agents make a few quick, hushed calls, and then come back over to me and just say, "Come with me." They immediately whisk me through a door and slam it on my pursuer, and I'm loaded onto the plane about 10 minutes before any other passenger. A stream of staff filters through, each one offering me a new apology. Eventually, the rest of the passengers get on, and they all shoot me glances as they pass by my row. Some of sympathy, some of sheer confusion. The man who sits behind me asks, "Hey man, what was that?" I give him the brief version, and then he tells me this. "She had a complete and total meltdown the second you got on this plane. Screaming, tearing her hair out, pounding her feet. They took her away in handcuffs. You really didn't know her?" Nope, I didn't. To this day, I still wonder all the time what the hell was going on with that woman. I've barely even told this story to many of my friends because it's just so unbelievable. I never received any other information about the incident. I never learned who she was, or why she thought I promised her anything, let alone eternal companionship and love. To this day, when I think about the look in her eyes when she said, "You promised me you'd never leave me," my skin crawls. So effing weird. Excuse me for not being an amazing storyteller, but this is definitely a true story. My mother used to work at a hotel in Washington, D.C. It was back in the 90s, and she was a housekeeper, or maid. She needed money because she was a refugee from Vietnam. Even though she didn't know much English at the time, she knew enough to get by at her job. Plus, all the other hotel staff and guests loved her because of how sweet she was. Because of this, anytime high-profile guests, such as the Backstreet Boys, would come and stay at the hotel, the manager always sent my mum to clean their rooms. One day, a guest came. We'll refer to him as Mr. M. He checked into their most expensive suite. As usual, the manager told my mum to take care of this room. As she got there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, so she told the manager that she'd go back later. What was weird was that no one was ever allowed into Mr. M's room. The man stayed there for over a month, and not one time did he let any staff come in to clean. However, he paid a lot, and he always gave a warm welcome every time he passed a staff member or housekeeper, so no one paid him any attention really. Then, one day, people didn't see him anymore. They assumed he had checked out, even though the receptionist had no account of that. Since it had been so long since the room had been cleaned, the manager told my mum to go and check it out and try and clean up what she could. As she got to the room and unlocked the door, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure out what it was, but she continued to survey the room. It was disgustingly messy. In her words, it looked like someone had thrown a rave, despite the fact that no one else had ever gone into Mr. M's room. None of the other guests, at least. It looked like Mr. M had deserted the place without telling anyone. My mum was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. As she followed the smell, she could tell it was coming from the closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a cardboard box on the ground. The smell was clearly resonating from it. My mother's first instinct was to open the box to see what it was, and to clean and throw it out. What she found scarred her. It was the rotting, decomposing head of a young woman. My mother immediately screamed and got out of there. She fainted in the elevator. When she woke up, the cops were everywhere, and the hotel was like a CSI scene. The manager told her that Mr. M wasn't the guy's real name, and he had used a fake credit card to check in. The head of the woman was identified to be that of a call girl. I don't know much more, or any of the nitty-gritty details, but I'm sure you can look it up on the internet for more information. Needless to say, my mum quit that day.
When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I had checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I'd seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words. So I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her. And what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit the guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. I am not one to have a great memory. Most things from my childhood I tend to forget, but this little event I could never forget. So it starts off in Texas at a relative's farm, at least 14 years back during the summer. My family and I were just starting to move, and since my brother and I were kind of small and not exactly helpful with moving stuff like furniture, we had to stay with our aunt, who is my dad's sister, and my uncle, who recently married my aunts and their son. I was around 6 years old and my cousin was 12. My brother was 14. The three of us used to help out with many of the animals that were at the farms to waste time, but whenever our aunts and uncles say they didn't need our help, we would run off and do our own thing, which in other words meant going out with our slingshots. This one day, our uncle told us that we could stay out as late as we wanted, so this meant we didn't have to come back before sundown like we usually did. The three of us, my cousin, my brother, and I, decided that we were going to go out as far as we possibly could from that farm and practice with their flimsy slingshots. Looking back at this, it's kind of funny how the three of us thought we could get anything and everything with a rickety slingshot. After a couple of hours and not finding anything and being at least a mile or two from the farm, we decided to go back. On the way back, we saw what we all thought was a coyote on the way back, near the chicken pen. Seeing that it would take a long time to grab our uncle, the three of us with our flimsy slingshots tried to take care of it. Big mistake. The coyote turned around and started to slowly walk at us. The closer it got, the bigger it seemed to get. And soon I realized that it was not a coyote, but some sort of creature with some long wire-like hair, red all over its face. It was out of nowhere. My brother dropped his slingshot, grabbed me, and started bolting towards the house with our cousin following behind, screaming at us to run. I can't remember how long it took us to actually make it inside that house, but I was so happy to make it inside. Whatever that thing was, it stayed outside watching us. It wasn't until our aunt saw it outside that it left. My aunt thought it was just a coyote, but my cousin was sure it was a skinwalker. Our uncle sided with him on whatever it was. My uncle was a Navajo and didn't joke about this stuff, but my brother, my aunt, and I weren't. My cousin, who grew up learning about these legends, kept telling him that it was a skinwalker until he was bawling his eyes out. Our uncle decided to believe him and fortify the house the best he could that night. The next day we went outside and found all the chickens torn apart outside their pens. My parents came that same day to pick up my brother and I, mainly because our uncle was calling them frantically and they worried about our safety. I rarely keep in touch with those relatives anymore due to my family moving all those years ago, and whenever I do, we never bring up the incident anymore, out of fear that it may have actually been a skinwalker.
In the earliest months of 2014, I started dating my current boyfriend. We hit it off immediately, which resulted in me staying at his house multiple nights out of the week. Eventually, I ended up living there, sharing a mobile home with him and his father. The neighborhood itself was fairly creepy, one of those unnamed country areas that branch from a main road. Richard, my boyfriend's dad, would tell me stories about how the entire street was owned by one man, a guy who had gotten old in recent years and let the land go. As a result, the field beside our mobile home was overgrown with weeds and old trees. He also told me about these strange occurrences, of which he attributed to two things: aliens and kids from another neighborhood. Despite his warnings and how creepy the area was, I didn't take him too seriously. After all, his biggest concern was aliens. I was unemployed for a short period of time after moving in, which left me alone in the house while my boyfriend and his dad went to work. I spent most of my days putting in job applications, cleaning up the house, and reading online. I guess you could say that my presence at the house was pretty predictable, which is the only explanation to this occurrence. On a day as unremarkable as any other, while I sat reading a book in my bedroom, I heard a car pull into our driveway. The sound was pretty distinctive, considering the area wasn't paved, but rather made up of gravel. Thinking that my boyfriend, Cody, had come home early from work, I slipped some shoes on and started for the front door, which was on the other side of the house. Before I could reach it, a knock sounded against the glass. The front of our trailer had a sunroom, basically a front porch that is encased with windows, making it so you had to go through two doors before stepping into the living room. Being as paranoid as he was, Richard would usually lock the sunroom door before leaving for work, unless he was in a huge hurry. Still, thinking that maybe my boyfriend had come home early from work, I opened the front door to let him in. Only it wasn't Cody at the door, but a rather short Hispanic man. He smiled at me through the glass and nodded, almost as if I was exactly who he was expecting to answer. I noticed that he had one hand behind his back, and the other was hanging at his side. I tried not to think too much about it. Beside him, in our carport, was a small white truck, and I could hear that the engine was still running. Hey, can I help you? I tried to make my voice as strong as I could, but it only came out shaky. I'm with the garbage company. I'm here to pick up your trash cans. I blinked, knowing immediately that this was a lie. Yes, it was common for the garbage company to come and pick up trash cans if the bill hadn't been paid, but I'd gone with Cody the week before to pay it. Not to mention, the drivers never knocked on the door. They would only ever take the cans and leave. I glanced to my left, seeing that our trash cans were still there, on the outside of the sunroom, somewhat behind the house. They're right there. If you need them, then take them. This time, my voice was more assertive, causing my visitor's smile to turn into a frown. "May I come in?" he asked. I didn't verbally answer. I just shook my head. My heart dropped as I watched him reach up and grab the handle to the glass door, pulling on it to open it. The door clicked, obviously locked. The man tried to pull it again, this time harder, causing the metal to creak. I jumped back into my house and slammed the front door, locking it with purpose. It was so quiet in the house that I only noticed two sounds: my heart pounding, and the doorknob to our back door jiggling. There was no way it could have been the guy from the front porch. He wouldn't have had time to get to the back door, even if he ran. I yelled through the door, "I'm calling the fucking police!" still baffled at the fact that this was all happening in broad daylight. I could hear the truck drive through the carport and into our backyard immediately after that. I took a moment to look through the blinds of a window, watching as a separate man jumped off of the back porch and into the passenger seat. To this day, I'm convinced that these men knew I was home alone and carefully planned an attack. One of them was meant to distract me, while the other broke into the back door. I still don't know what was hidden behind the back of the guy at the front door. All I can say is that I'm forever thankful of how paranoid my father-in-law is. Who knows what could have happened if he hadn't locked the sunroom door. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, born and raised, and I have my own story to share. One that's equal parts bizarre and disturbing. Around 4 years ago, I was walking through one of the local parks early in the morning, well before anyone else was up and awake. I'd just broken up with my long-term girlfriend and was having difficulty sleeping. As I strolled through the empty park, I heard something that caught my attention. A soft whimpering. Sheltered under a tree on my left was a dog, a black Labrador to be precise. The poor thing must have gotten lost, I thought. I leant down to pet the little guy, and his tail immediately started wagging like crazy. He licked my hand and made it clear that, like me, he was in need of a friend. No collar, nor anything else to suggest he had an owner. What was he doing out here all by himself? Had somebody kicked him out? Was he a stray? I stood up and walked a few steps to look around for his owner, but the dog wouldn't leave me alone. He was like my shadow. Wherever I walked, he followed. Together, we walked the length and breadth of that park. Occasionally, I called out, "Hello? Hello? I have your dog here." But there was nobody around at all. No one was looking for the poor fella. I looked down at him and stared into his big brown eyes, a pair that said, "Please, take me with you." It seemed like the universe had thrown the two of us together. This dog was the answer to my newfound loneliness, and I was the answer to his. I took him home with me. For a long time, I did my best to track down his owner. I reported the dog as missing and put up flyers around town, but nobody ever got in contact with me. It looked like I'd found myself a new canine housemaid. I named him Scooby. Creative, I know. Every morning, I'd take Scooby for a long walk. The first week I had him, we walked the exact same route around town. Thing is, every time we came to pass this one particular house, Scooby would stop and start crying. I'd try and pull him away, try to get him to keep going, but he'd just stare at the house and whine like crazy. Each time we came to pass that house, it'd take me a good 10 minutes to get him to continue on with me, tugging on his leash the entire time. After the 6th or 7th time we passed that house, it became clear to me that he was going to do this every time. So, in the end, I just decided to switch up our walking route. I had no idea what got into him, or why that house seemed to bother him so much. It wasn't like he was crying to go inside. He never tugged on his leash to get closer. It was more like he was afraid of something in there, but couldn't bring himself to leave. Like a human who can't look away from a deadly accident. He had some sort of strange, doggy fascination with the place. Anyway, for the next 6 months I owned Scooby, I took him on several different walking routes, making sure that we never passed that damn house that freaked him out so much. One day though, I had an early morning errand to run, which took me past that house. I decided to take Scooby along with me, get his daily walk out of the way, completely forgetting about how he acted 6 months earlier. Well, Scooby hadn't forgotten about that house. Not by a long shot. As we came to pass it, he once again froze in place and refused to move. He whimpered loudly, refusing to take his eyes off the place. "Come on, Scoob, there's a good boy," I said to him, trying to calm him down and coax him along a bit. It didn't work. He seemed more unsettled by that house than he ever had been before. "Hey, what's gotten into you, boy?" I asked him rhetorically. He must have stayed like that for a good 15 minutes this time, just staring and crying, refusing to budge. Then, without warning, he bolted towards the house, pulling his leash right out of my hands. "Scooby!" I shouted. "Get back here!" It was no use. Whatever fear had consumed him before, he had conquered it. He rushed to that house, ran around the corner and into the backyard. God damn it, Scooby, I thought. The owners must have a cat or something. That's why he always acts crazy around here. I chased Scooby into the house's backyard, completely embarrassed, praying that I could get him out of there before the owners woke up and started cussing me out. I got back there and found Scooby frantically digging a hole in the grass. I'd never seen him acting like this before. He never dug holes in my backyard. I tried to pull him away, but he just shook me off and kept digging, his little paws throwing up earth left, right, and center. I was furious with him. But, you see, Scooby knew something I didn't. Knew a secret that nobody else knew. He knew what was buried in that yard. His former owner. Scooby's digging unearthed the largely decomposed corpse of a 32-year-old man, shallowly buried in the garden of your average suburban house in North Carolina. The man had been down there for as long as I'd had Scooby. The authorities were alerted, and an investigation began. Turns out the house was a rental. The dead man had been living there with his girlfriend and their dog. All their neighbors and their friends in the area knew them as Jim and Charlotte. These turned out to be fake identities. Everything people thought they knew about their lives and their pasts were a lie. The inside of their house remained untouched. Nothing appeared to have been taken. As of right now, the police still haven't been able to track down the so-called Charlotte. She remains the prime suspect for his killing, though nobody's really sure if she was behind it all and went on the run, or if she herself was a victim too, buried somewhere else by somebody else. If she was responsible, then she left in a damn hurry, as pretty much all her personal possessions were still inside the house. Her wallet, her fake ID, everything but her cell phone. Whatever the case, no one has ever come forward to reveal either Jim or Charlotte's real identities. No friends, no family, no one. As such, Jim was reburied here in Nashville and given an unnamed headstone. The strangest part in my eyes is that the house's rent was still being paid when the body was found, despite the fact it had been empty for 6 months. The landlord had always been paid in cash, which arrived in an envelope through the mail. It was always addressed from Jim, even after his demise. So, the question is, who was still paying the rent? Charlotte, the girlfriend? Someone else who didn't want the new tenants to be digging around in the garden? That all remains unclear. I'm sure there are details the cops haven't revealed to the public, but still, it's a little weird. Scooby is still around to this day. He still cries whenever we go past that house, but he doesn't stop and stare anymore. In his own way, I like to think he found a little closure. I don't know how his last owner treated him or what he was like, but Scooby didn't want to leave him down there in the ground. He's a good boy. I'll update you all if they ever find the woman.
I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, but this story happened when I was 15. I'm also from France. When I was 15 and just got into my junior year, I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account, and as far as location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people, so my timeline wasn't really that interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200 followers account, and the message was like, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in," stating my hometown. because I'll soon move in and go to that town's high school and I'm looking for friends. The town he said was obviously the town I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile I said where I actually lived, but after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet that I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city, so I told myself that he must have looked up for that town and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and since he was polite, I answered him. I told him that I was indeed from that town and I go to the high school there. The discussion was natural and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions like, do you live far away from the school? In a house or an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you? You're not often home alone, right? I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, the same thing. We talked a lot and he was still asking personal questions to know me better, so I asked him too, and he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed because I had been bullied for years, and even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back-to-school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school because he had finally moved in with his mom and asked about a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said that he would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still in school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day, I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes, I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time had arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He wasn't a catfish. He looked quite like his profile, but I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he had told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot, we got along well, and I was so pleased. And at the end of the break, he had asked me to go to the fast food restaurant with him for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's kind of my principle. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed, again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the 3rd floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. A surprising fact is that I never saw him in the hallways nor at the cafeteria, but I thought that at the time that the building was huge and there was over 1,500 students in here, so if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was abroad for work. My brother was always at his friend's house. My little sis was on a school trip and my mom had to work late that very night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus, waved at him and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 5:45 p.m. in December, so it was already really dark outside, and as I got out of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach, and I felt like I was being watched. I pressed the pause on my music, but kept my earphones in, so that people thought that I couldn't hear anything, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, so there was no visibility on the big road that the bus dropped me off on. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood that I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least, I could hear that he was not accelerating, so he was not trying to catch up to me, but I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. The best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and to close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It's not a peephole, it's a whole window, so if someone wanted to see what's happening inside, they can. And it was Rob. A few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for a chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police then. I was completely paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a few minutes, and when I took back control over my body, I ran into the kitchen to get a knife and got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't. That moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter and got back to the door. He looked angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house and Rob ran away, probably thinking it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with the story. But quickly after, some accounts which had been created followed me. Their ats were all a series of numbers in the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one would follow me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one even heard about a Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school, and that is why I've never met him apart from our daily meetings, and that is probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I was still asking myself, what did he want, and what could have happened that night?
This happened on a Norwegian peninsula when I was about 15 years old. It must have been 2006, give or take a year. Regardless, it was Halloween night, and I didn't really have any plans. Too old for trick-or-treating, too young for partying. It was a small peninsula anyway, so there wasn't much going on. I was just sat at home, playing RuneScape on my desktop. This continued until sundown. You could say I was mildly addicted to that game. I usually like to play with the lights off. Bad for your eyes, but I like the mood it set. Anyway, it's around 9 PM. My mum comes into my room and pats me on the shoulder. "Didn't you hear me? I said I'm going out for 20 minutes, she said. I had my noise-cancelling headphones on, so I was oblivious to the fact that she'd been shouting to me. She heads downstairs, and I hear the door slam. I put my headphones back on and sink back into my own little pixelated world. As such, I can't really tell you how much time passed when this happened. When you looked out of my bedroom door, which at the time was wide open, you could see down into the long corridor leading to my mum's room opposite. Since all of the lights were off, I could only really make out the outlines of all the objects, and that was only after my eyes adjusted after looking at the bright computer screen. Until then, it was like looking into a dark void of total blackness. You know when one of your senses has picked up on something that you're not totally conscious of yet, and you feel a little uneasy? Well, that happened to me while I was playing. It felt like someone else was around me, like that I'm being watched sensation. I figure my mum came back from wherever she went, and that I just hadn't heard her due to my headphones. But if that was the case, why hadn't she turned the lights on? I looked down into the dark corridor. At the far end, something's glowing. It's large, and fluorescent green. It's spherical. Looks like a floating orb of some kind. I freak out and whip off my headphones. After looking at it for a moment, it becomes clear that this isn't an orb at all, or anything supernatural like that. There's 2 black holes where eyes should be, and a dark slit for a mouth. It's a glow-in-the-dark mask, and it's not floating. Someone's wearing it. Whoever it is facing me. I can't make out the rest of their body, but the head is definitely looking in my direction and is slowly inching closer. It's some sort of distorted, expressionless face. It's hard to describe, but the image of it is burned deep into my memory. Realizing he's been spotted, the guy freezes. We just stare at each other for what felt like the longest time. He raises a finger up to the lips of his mask. Shh. I'm just a trick-or-treater. It's a thick, manly voice, one I didn't recognize. In a state of shock, and not really knowing how to react, I just sit there, keeping my eyes on him. So, trick or treat. I mumble out, neither. Please go now. But he doesn't go. The glowing face starts moving towards me. Desperate to keep him out of my bedroom, I leap up and slam my door closed, locking it and pressing the full weight of my body against it. The guy is just outside my door. I can hear his deep breaths on the other side. He tries the door handle. It rattles. More heavy breaths. He tries the handle again. Then I can hear quick footsteps moving down the stairs, and what I think is my front door opening and closing. Still in shock, I just sit in my barricaded room, sobbing to myself until my mum finally returns. It felt like forever since I'd last seen her. She asked me what was wrong, why I was crying, and why there was a large Hessian sack left in the corridor. I told her what had just happened. She called the police for me immediately. I like to think that this was just a crazy person, and that they didn't really have any intention of harming me. Just some sort of messed up Halloween prank. Whatever the case, it was a surreal experience, and the image of that floating, talking face has haunted me for the longest time. The most unnerving part about this to me, though, is the fact that the peninsula really was very small. For me to see a face around town that I didn't recognize was very rare. More than likely, someone in my family knew who this person was. Hell, I probably knew who it was. I hate to think that after that event, I may very well have interacted with that person. The thought that they specifically targeted me out of everyone in the area made me extremely uncomfortable. I never felt safe there after that. That's part of the reason I moved away when I was 18. A few years ago, my aunt and her husband hired me to babysit for them. It was Halloween weekend, and they were going out to a party somewhere. Their son Josh, who was only 10 months old at the time, was a really simple kid to take care of. He rarely cried, and was really no trouble whatsoever. To top it off, he was super cute. Still is. Anyway, I arrive at their place, and they head off to their party, saying that they'll be back before 11 PM, and that if there's any problems, to call them immediately. The night was mostly routine. A couple of trick-or-treaters came to the door, but other than that, it was just me watching TV. The baby was asleep upstairs, and I had the monitor with me at all times. I also made sure to check up on him every 10 minutes or so. Call me paranoid, but whatever. I just wanted to make sure that he was okay. It's around 11:30 PM. Great. My aunt and uncle are taking longer than they said. I'm watching a Nick Cage movie while struggling to stay awake. This turned out to be a losing battle. I end up closing my eyes for what I thought was just a moment, but when I opened them and checked the clock, I realized I'd been asleep for almost half an hour. Fantastic. nearly midnight, and they're still not back. I pick up the baby monitor, and immediately, something doesn't sound quite right. Baby Josh isn't crying or anything. I can hear his peaceful little breaths clearly through the device, but there's a slight creaking that seemed out of place. It sounded like the floorboards. Surely he hadn't gotten out of his cot and started taking his first steps. I couldn't help but wonder what that sound was. I get an uncomfortable feeling swell up inside me. I make my way to the foot of the stairs, and instinctively, uncomfortably, I lightly call out, "Joshy, I'm coming up now." I walk up the creaky steps and into where Josh was sleeping. He was laying there, completely comfortable and snug as a bug. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. I watch over him for a few moments, and for whatever reason, decide to stay with him until his parents arrive. After another half an hour, I hear their car finally pull into the driveway. They enter the house, and I make my way downstairs to greet them. I expect them to ask how things were, or to give a friendly sorry for being late. But instead, the first thing they ask me is, why is the spare key in the door? I went outside to check, and there it was. A key was in the front door, which obviously wasn't there when the pair had gone off to their party. They had both forgotten that they'd left a spare under the doormat and only remembered when they saw it. The door itself was still unlocked when they arrived back home. My uncle ran inside and searched the whole place thoroughly. Whoever had used that key to gain entrance to the house was now gone. I still don't know how they managed to sneak out under my very nose. 4 months after this incident, a human trafficking ring was busted in our area. The group didn't discriminate based on age. They'd sell women and young girls into domestic or sexual slavery, and babies to the highest bidder. Usually, this would be to people in the Far East that wanted a white child, but I guess all sorts of people were potential buyers. According to my uncle's friend who's in the force, it seems likely that this group had been staking out their house and realized that the spare key had been left under the mat. They didn't bother to rob the house when the whole family was out though. They were waiting until the baby became an easy target. Given enough time, an opportunity was bound to arise. When it did, that Halloween night, they took it, and I'm damn thankful that I woke up when I did. Thank God for baby monitors, that's all I can say. This encounter takes place several years ago, in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a bit of background, I'm a pretty built 6'2" dude, and I was around 26 years old at the time. I was on a road trip with a mate, travelling around the central Queensland outback, in my old, semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both massive science zoology nerds, and had heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of 3 areas, Winton, Richmond, and Hewenden, that have had previous dino bone discoveries, still have fossils, as well as a seriously awesome dinosaur track with preserved foot imprints. We were staying at a place 3 hours from Winton for a couple of days, and were pretty keen to check out this trail. So, we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 AM the next morning, car packed with lunch, several litres of water, and my trusty GPS, and off we went. It was a long drive, and halfway through, my aircon decided to cark it. If any of you live in or have visited Australia in the summer, you would know that it's brutally hot, so I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip without aircon was hell. To make matters worse, my GPS also stopped working, as the map software didn't recognise the area we were in. Luckily, I had an old Refidex in my back seat, but it was pretty tough to revert back to map reading when you're so used to a computer screen telling you where to go, especially given we're talking about the Australian outback here, complete with dirt tracks for roads and very limited signage. But I digress. Finally, we make it to the trail, and kick around there for a couple of hours. Not gonna lie, it was pretty awesome. Then we decided to make the trip back, as it was starting to get later in the afternoon, and we didn't want to drive back in the dark. As we were about to leave, this gnarly old guy, who appeared to be an employee of the trail company, dressed in all khaki camouflage gear, asked us about where we were from and where we were heading. He gave me the stink eye when I was vague with details, but my mate told him the name of the town we were staying at. He took a real liking to my mate, and he laughed when he told him about our lengthy journey. Apparently we had taken the long route, and there was a much quicker way back that would shave about an hour off our trip. We jumped at the directions he gave us, which were all verbal, and we wrote them down. Off we went on our merry way, thinking how lucky we were that we met this old dude, who gave us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. But I can't deny, there was a definite creepy vibe coming off him. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in an area I'd never been in, and eventually settled straight back on a narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection after about half an hour of driving, take a right and continue on that road until we got to a main highway that would take us back. After about an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail though, we still hadn't reached the intersection. I was starting to freak out a bit, thinking we'd missed the turn, but my mate was completely chilled out and was sure that we'd get there eventually. I think he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there, and they're dangerous if you hit one. We'd been travelling for quite a while now, and it was getting later and later in the day, and it got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads or cars in sight, and I was really not comfortable with where this was headed. The middle of nowhere, in a remote area, in the wasteland that is the Australian outback. There weren't any trees, only this dirt road and desolate, dry bushland as far as the eye can see. I stopped the car and told my mate to get the binoculars out of the back to take a look around in case there was any landmarks. Yes, I carried binoculars in my car, and I still do. He obliges, and I can just make out a house-like structure not too far in the distance, so we made the decision to head for that. We figured it could be a house, and maybe the people would be nice enough to give us some petrol to top us up, and some better directions to get us out of there. As we neared this structure, it became apparent that this was no house at all. We pulled up out front, and see that it's an old caravan that's been burned to a shell from the inside out. It's still got 3 blackened partial walls up though, so we can't see all the way in, and it looks like someone's been there recently, because there are animal bones strung up all over the place, and a cow skull at the entrance of the caravan. Some of the animal bone things even have grass or horsehair woven into them, and they're arranged like decorations. Then we see this hand-painted sign that's been staked into the ground, with the words, "Moonlight Motel," written on it. My alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friend and say, let's get the fuck out of here, but he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car, coming in the direction we'd just come from. It must have only been 10 minutes behind us the entire time we were driving, but I didn't see it once. It's kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it's coming towards us fast. It's at this point we both hear a creepy scratching sound coming from the burned out caravan, like someone scratching at the wall from the inside. I move a little closer to try and see what it is, and there is a person in there, peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. Then, this childlike voice, that's obviously a grown man imitating a little girl, giggles and says, "Are you here to play with me?" My mate and I both look at each other, and we book it out of there, back into the inner sanctum of the X-Trail. Just as I'm about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind my car, with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way, so I can't reverse out of there. I have no choice but to drive forward and turn around that way, narrowly missing the state motel sign. As we're turning to leave, the driver starts to blare the horn, just hammering it for no reason at all. I just sped off back in the direction that we came, and thankfully the other car doesn't follow. It's getting to twilight at this stage, and pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads once it's dark, because of the aforementioned kangaroo situation. But we're feeling a bit better, as we managed to navigate our way back to where we came from, the Dino Trail, and even start to joke around about what happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention to help with directions or something. I pull into the parking lot and go to the front desk area of the company that runs the tours. I explained that we had gotten lost on the way back to the town we were staying at, and the lady there was kind enough to give us just enough petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself, and I mentioned to her that our workmate was a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. We figured there was no way that we could have messed up with the directions that he gave us. At this point, she gives me a weird look and asked if I could describe him. So I describe him, and her face goes funny, and she says, "That man doesn't work here. I saw him talking with the tourists today, and my boss had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get the details of where people were staying, and telling them that he had vacancies at his place, and they could stay there, the Moonlight Motel." So, to the creepy old dude, who was pretending to give helpful directions to a couple of city folk, to trap and potentially murder them in your lovely accommodation, let's not meet. My uncle Miguel had a harrowing experience whilst on a date in Mexico. It was 1980-something, and he was travelling around the country, living the dream. He was never lucky when it came to love, still isn't. But whilst just outside Guadalajara, he met a girl called Ramona. According to him, she was young, vivacious, and extremely beautiful. The pair of them went on a date together, and it went really well. As such, my uncle decided to stay in town a bit longer than he originally planned, just so that the two of them could have a second date. She was apparently a girl worth sticking around for. Not only was she super sexy and witty, she was also charming and sweet. It was only their second date, but he figured, who knows, maybe she's the one. He still wonders if she might have been to this day. My uncle and Ramona were having dinner in a restaurant, a fancy place that was out of most people's price range. He wanted to show off to her and make it obvious that he was serious about her. The restaurant itself was full, but one table of men in particular stood out to my uncle. They were dressed decadently, but tastelessly. White suits, gold chains, sunglasses indoors. They were making twice as much noise as all of the rest of the diners combined. Put it this way, it was clear to everyone in there that these guys were narcos. Still, they ignored the men as best they could and sat down for their meal. The conversation was flowing, and according to my uncle, there was a definite chemistry between him and Ramona. The whole evening, however, the group of narcos were eyeing up my uncle's date. It was making them both feel a little uneasy, so after dessert, my uncle quickly waves to a waiter for the check. The waiter appears uncomfortable, sweaty. He approaches my uncle and tells him not to worry about the bill. Apparently, their dinner had already been paid for. "What are you talking about? Who paid our bill?" my uncle asked. The waiter gestured to the group of narcos. They were all looking over at him, raising their glasses. This obviously spelled trouble. You could tell just from the way these guys looked that they had something planned. Knowing the type of men they were, most people probably would have stood up and walked out of there as fast as they could, not wanting to engage them. My uncle, however, was a proud man and didn't want to seem weak in front of his date. He wasn't about to be shown up by these Pablo Escobar wannabes. He approached them with his chest puffed out, acting as confident as he could. He planned to politely tell them that he didn't need their charity. Before he could say anything, however, one of the men, a guy dressed in all white, asked him a question. Did you enjoy your dinner with your wife? She's not my wife, my uncle replied. She's my date. That's lucky for you. She's very pretty. Confused, my uncle simply said, I want to pay for our food myself. How much do I owe you? With what my uncle describes as the purest look of soullessness he's ever seen, the man in white says, No, consider it a goodbye gift, because after this, you'll never see her again. Nobody at the table laughed. All of the men just smiled at my Uncle Miguel. These guys were being serious. My uncle doesn't respond, just walks back to his date and hurries her out of the restaurant. He and Ramona jumped into his car and sped away, leaving only dust clouds in their wake. He continued driving for what must have been 45 minutes through the desolate Mexican countryside, checking his mirrors every few seconds to see if they were being pursued. From what he could tell, they had gotten away. Needing to fill up his tank, my uncle pulled into a gas station in this barren area. He had no other choice, and they were running on fumes. As he got out of the car to fill her up, 3 other cars also pulled in, surrounding my uncle's vehicle. They had been followed after all. A number of men got out of the cars, aiming guns at my uncle and his date. They then took Ramona, kicking and screaming, threw her in the back of one of the cars, and drove off with her. There was nothing my uncle could do to stop them. He had never been so powerless in all his life. All he could do was watch as the cars drove over the horizon and out of sight, taking with them any trace that Ramona existed, and any chance of a happy future that my uncle and her could have had together. Whoever the guy in white was, he was right. That night really was the last time my Uncle Miguel saw Ramona. For all he knows, she may have died that very night, or might still be alive today somewhere. Whatever happened to her though, he's sure it doesn't bear thinking about. Things like this happen from time to time in Bandito country. Most of the time, people don't even report these abductions to the police, terrified of what might happen if they do.
I've always had a weak heart. Not physically. I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was unsurprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor weak heart wouldn't last till Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank, and I spent my money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead, and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly, carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was lying in bed on the last night, the thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong. I know it was. But I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name. I knew what ward she was staying on. I had overheard the 2 nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I had time on my hands now. In the second to last room, she lay in bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand, and my own weak heart stuttered. Excuse me. I had no idea what to say to her. I'm Jenna. I'm the person. I'm having surgery tomorrow, and... What I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eye that she knew who I was. Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living on in you. I wanted to meet you. I stood there, helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. Please, she said, Don't feel uncomfortable. It's what she would have wanted. I sat on the chair next to Laura. How did she... I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. She was a care worker, looked after battered wives, abused women. Last month she met a guy and, well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs, and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her. Laura's mother looked down. I don't know why I did it, but I reached over and held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once who... he was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave. Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand, tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes my hand sometimes as well. I think the doctors called it muscle spasms. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent wounds that had just started to bleed on the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with, the raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process, they reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older, and her hand shook when she gave me a hug. When are you going home? Tomorrow, I told her. Please, come visit whenever you want. I started to jot down my address for her, when out of the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway. The same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. Ow! I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it had almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. What's wrong? Is it your heart? She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura's had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slot back into where I had left off. My life had been almost over the last time I had been here. I looked over the mess and the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings so my parents wouldn't have to do it when I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly, it felt like it would come out of my chest. It did this all the time, and I realized this was what a healthy heart must feel like. So why couldn't I shake my feelings of unease? That night, I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, and her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrums so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed. Her lips were blue, and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. "Get out!" she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heartbeat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud, it felt like it would rupture my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from some deep place inside me. I could feel it reverberating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance or my mom, anyone that would pick up. "Get out!" It was a faint whisper over the hammering thumbs of Laura's heart. a low guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal, and I crawled to the door, down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbor opened the door, his eyes as wide as saucers as the sight of me on the floor clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me that absolutely nothing was wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and that everything was going just swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart didn't belong to me. The phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained, scary things, like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. Hello? Good morning. This is the Thames Valley Police. We've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat around 1:30 a.m. today. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I recently had surgery, and I wasn't feeling well. I had to have my neighbor drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway before I left. There was a small silence on the other end of the phone. I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for. I felt Laura's heartbeats, strong and calm. There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police records, he's your ex-partner, and you filed a restraining order against him in September 2017. My blood ran cold. I did. He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. We have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in depending on how long your hospital stay will be. I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment, I leaned against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part of her to helping those who needed it. I put both my hands on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura.
When I was 22, I lived in a semi-hip, semi-sketchy part of Brooklyn, known as South Williamsburg. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a lesbian roommate named Tony, who I didn't get along with very well, and I regularly went on dates with guys I met online. Most of these dates were nothing to write home about, but then there was the time I met Dave. Dave and I agreed to meet for a few drinks at my favourite bar, which was called Barcade. This bar was amazing because it had dozens of American microbrews on tap, and because the entire large space was filled with 80s arcade games, which were all still $0.25 a play. I'm talking Miss Pac-Man, Galaga, Space Invaders 1942, Tapper, Gauntlet, you name it. What I didn't realise is the decision to meet at this particular bar possibly saved my life. So I met him at Barcade, ordered a beer, cashed in $2 in quarters, and challenged him to a few games. We started out having fun, playing in turns and cheering the other one on. But after a few rounds of Punch-Out, he started getting antsy. A lot of, do you want to take this back to my place, and let's get out of here, etc. I blew him off and didn't think anything of it at first, since I still had quite a few quarters left and just thought he was anxious to get into my pants. I finished my beer and ordered a second, which is usually my limit for sobriety, seeing as I'm quite small. Then my favourite game opened up. I excitedly ran for it, put a quarter in, and I sucked. I just couldn't time anything right. I kept missing my cues and didn't make it past the first round. This was weird, since I pretty much lived on this game, and beat anyone I challenged on it. When I mentioned with wounded pride that I'm normally not this bad after only one beer, he started to get even more incessant. No, seriously, let's go. This place is too crowded for good conversation. Let's go somewhere quieter. I didn't understand, since we'd only been there for about half an hour, and I was interested in having some fun, but I also wanted to get to know him first. I again insisted on using my quarters, of which I only had 2 left. I put another one in the game, determined to kick some ass, and this time not only could I not make it past the first round, but I had trouble even holding onto my joystick correctly. This is when I started putting 2 and 2 together. I realized I was in a really bad situation, and I needed to play it cool, so I did what any normal 22-year-old would do. I excused myself to the bathroom, and proceeded to flip the fuck out. I called my roommate, and begged her to come and get me. We only lived a few blocks away, but she was at her girlfriend's house in Park Slope, about a 15-minute cab ride, and was in the middle of a date. I begged her and offered to pay for not only their date, but also the cost of the cab, and finally she agreed to come and get me. While I waited, I just hung out in the bathroom, getting more and more freaked out, losing more and more of my fine motor skills as the minutes went by. As women came into the bathroom, I kept asking them to check if he was still out there. For the first 20 minutes, he was. After that, people kept coming back and saying he was gone. I still didn't feel safe leaving the bathroom though. I stayed there, on the phone with my friend in North Carolina, waiting for Tony to show up. After an hour, she walked in and carried me out of the bar. I was able to walk with assistance, so it was more like a leaning carry if you can imagine that. She was still upset with me interrupting her date though, so instead of taking me back to the apartment, she took me to a gay bar nearby, the Metropolitan. I got parked on a chair for the next hour while she partied with some friends, I think. Honestly, my memory of this is a little hazy. I just know we were there. All I remember next is waking up in my bed in the middle of the night, but having crazy cramps and spasms all over my body, and not being able to control it. Then, I don't remember anything else until the next morning, where my only remaining symptom was a really bad headache. I never heard from Dave again, although I did get a phone call 2 days later from a blocked number, where a woman yelled curses at me for 30 seconds before threatening to kill me and hanging up. I don't know why, but I'm convinced the two events are connected. Either way, that's my story. I was drugged, but not raped, and I am forever thankful.
One night when I was 15 years old, I arrived home just after midnight and my parents were already in bed. I decided to leave the back door unlocked for my older brother since he was sleeping over a friend's house. Big mistake. In the middle of the night, I awoke to feel something cold and metallic pressing on my neck. At first I thought it was my brother playing a prank on me, but then I couldn't see the pitch black bedroom. Then a big hairy hand covered my nose and mouth. I couldn't breathe. I heard a deep rasping voice say, "If you make any noise, I'll kill you." After my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the shape of a man leaning over me. There was no face, just a black mask with holes cut out for the eyes. He was holding a knife to my throat. I knew my parents were asleep in the next room, so I tried to make as much noise as I could, but the man's hand muffled my screams. I kicked my legs trying to bang on the walls so my parents could hear it. All of a sudden, through the screams, I can hear my parents get up and they're running towards my room. When my parents opened the bedroom door, they were confronted by a terrifying scene. All they could see in the darkened room was a big black silhouette bent over me and holding a knife to my throat. As soon as he saw the knife, my father jumped on top of the intruder and struggled with him. My mother grabbed the man's wrist and wrestled the knife out of his hand. My father managed to get his arm around the masked man's neck and began to choke him. I grabbed my cell phone and I ran outside to call 911 as my parents kept the intruder pinned to the bedroom floor until the police arrived. The bedroom door burst open and the police officer ran in holding a gun, yelling, "Don't move or I'll blow your head off." The police handcuffed the intruder and dragged him out of the house. When police searched the man's truck, they found a variety of weapons and some bloody clothes. It turned out that the masked man had already murdered 2 people a few days before. My family and I, we had no way of knowing it, but we had just captured a serial killer. And the scariest part about this is that it can happen to anyone at any time. This was real. The killer's name is Adam Leroy Lane, and he'll be spending the next 25 years to 30 years in prison. What I've learned from this is to always lock my back door.
So right when I was fresh out of college, I managed to land myself a job with an engineering firm over in Pennsylvania. It kind of sucked having to move away from Rochester, New York, where all my friends and family were, but the salary this firm was offering was so sweet that I just couldn't turn it down. So I went online and got looking for apartments just outside of Philly, eventually finding an advert for a guy who was looking for a roommate for a super swanky apartment. I mean, this place was really nice, and I could get why the guy would be looking for a roommate to split the rent with, especially since he seemed to be a younger dude who was probably in a similar position as I was. However, I didn't have the time to drive down to actually look at the place or meet the guy in person, so I pretty much did all the arrangements by phone, which maybe, now that I look back on it, was my first big mistake. So I moved in with this guy, Daryl, who was super chill and pretty much spent all day playing 2K since he worked nights. I figured that he must have had a pretty high-paying job, and since he had this huge flat-screen TV, lots of expensive clothes, a nice car, the works, really. We didn't talk all that much, since we were on such different schedules, but eventually, when I asked him exactly what it is that he did for a living, he gave some super vague answer about having some kind of accountancy job. And no matter how much I pressed him for details, he always gave some wishy-washy answer until he got tired of the questions and changed the subject. Like a lot of you reading this, I started to suspect that Daryl wasn't quite telling the truth about what he did for a living. Like, not once did I see him wearing anything like a shirt and tie. All his clothes were super upmarket, sure, but they were all super casual. He also had a lot of visitors in the evenings before we left for work. At first, I figured they were just friends of his, but there were a handful he didn't seem all that close with. And every time they stopped by to see him, at some point they'd just scuffle off into Daryl's bedroom for a while, talking in hushed tones before the visitor eventually left. I knew something was going on, but as embarrassing as it is, back then I was pretty naive. Besides that, I really didn't think it was any of my business. The last thing I wanted to do was upset my new roommate and screw away such a sweet living arrangement. So, this one Saturday, I'm in the local 7-Eleven just like a block away from the apartment, when this dude comes up to me as I'm looking at coffee and asks me if I'm the guy who lives with Daryl. Obviously, I'm all like, yeah, good to see you, dude. I didn't recognize the guy, but I figured that he'd visited the apartment one time and I just couldn't quite remember his face. He's being all friendly and whatnot, making small talk about this and that before he asked if I know whether or not Daryl was at home right then. I told him I didn't know, but that since it was like mid-afternoon that he probably was since he worked nights, whatever that entailed. The guy's all like, okay, cool, I might stop by and say hi. And all this stuff, then makes some excuses and leaves the store. I pick up a few things and head back to the apartment, half expecting to see the guy from the 7-Eleven when I walk through the door. Only he's not there, and when I tell Daryl about how I saw one of his buddies in the store, he has no idea who I'm talking about. Even when I describe the guy in quite vivid detail, he has absolutely zero clue who I'm referring to. He starts reeling off names, asking if it was Deshaun or Robbie or Angelo, and it's then that I sort of realize that the guy hadn't given me a name at all. Which is weird, right? I mean, I thought it was. You think the dude would have been like, tell him such and such said hi, or at least something like that. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but Daryl seemed just a little too freaked out by the encounter for my liking. And in the moments after I told him, he marches off into his bedroom and stays there for the rest of the evening, talking to someone, I'm guessing on the phone, in those same hushed tones that I was used to hearing. A few days after this, I'm walking back up towards the 7-Eleven to grab some milk for coffee when I see the same dude that hadn't given his name parked up at the side of the road. He calls out to me, greeting me and making chit-chat in that same warm way he had before again asking if Daryl was home. This time I straight up lie to him, telling him that, yeah, Daryl was home, only this time he was with a bunch of his friends playing 2K. He wasn't. He was actually out visiting family across the city, but there was something about this guy that I really didn't like. I quickly make an excuse telling him I had to go, and it was only then that this guy's demeanor started to change. He wasn't all smiles and laughs anymore. He just eyeballed me as I walked away, and he was still there when I walked back, just watching me as I walked towards our apartment. I should have seen it coming, and I feel like such an idiot for not knowing what I was headed for. But I guess in hindsight, it's always 2020. Because a couple of nights later, I was just about to catch some sleep when Daryl finally comes home from work. He seems a little shaken and asks me if anyone had called by the apartment that evening. I tell him no, it's been pretty quiet, but the answer doesn't satisfy him. He asks me if I'd seen anyone at all, anyone hanging around the area that I didn't recognize. I'd already told him about the second encounter that I'd had with the 7-Eleven guy, and this time it had creeped him out even more. He asked if I'd seen that same guy at any point that evening, and I told him no, that I hadn't seen him since that weekday evening. I turned the whole thing around and asked him why he was so nervous about this, if anything had happened at work that evening, but he was his usual cagey self. He just retreated to his bedroom where he apparently went straight to sleep, which is exactly what I did too. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to this loud banging on the front door to our apartment. I had pretty much knew exactly what the deal was. Daryl had gone out to make a call, as he sometimes did at this time of night, and had left his keys in the apartment. This had happened a handful of times before, and I was honestly getting really sick of being woken up by it. I suggested he actually put his car keys and apartment keys on the same key ring, but nope, apparently that meant if he lost one set, he lost both, which maybe was quite a smart idea in the long run, but that's beside the point. So I'm all bleary-eyed, shuffling toward the front door in my underwear and a t-shirt when he starts banging again. I'm like, all right, I'm coming. Stop with the banging, Jesus. Before I undo the deadbolts and open the door, I start saying something like, you really should just attach those freaking keys, when I see it's not Daryl at all. In fact, I have no idea who the guy at the door is, because he's wearing a freaking ski mask, and I have absolutely not the time or will to ask him, nor the other two idiots that he's with, because as soon as I open the door, he points a gun in my face, and then frog marches me back inside the apartment before locking the door behind them. The ski mask guy makes me kneel on the floor in the TV room and whispers to me that if I shout or anything, he's going to blow my brains out. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, more scared than I've ever been in my entire life. I had these uncontrollable shakes, like I had trouble just holding my head up. It was more comfortable for me to just rest my chin against my chest and pray that it'd all be over soon. This had a dual purpose too, because the last thing I saw before I did so and shut my eyes tight was one of the guys placing an empty plastic bottle of the muzzle on his pistol. Naive over something I was, yes, but I knew enough to know that this was some kind of ad hoc way to silence his shot. I didn't want to see what happened next, and I'm glad I didn't, because they burst into Daryl's room, and I heard the pop of that pistol as they shot him. I thought he was dead for a few minutes, like I was convinced that they just straight up executed him right there in his bed. That was until they dragged him out of the bedroom, bleeding and cursing, and threw him down on the TV room floor a few meters away from me. The one guy kept his gun to the back of my head while they pretty much tortured Daryl right there in the TV room. One guy stamped on the bullet wound that he had, leaning on it with his sneaker, while the other forced his face into a couch cushion to muffle the screams. I mean, it was all obviously horrible what they were doing, and that was disturbing enough, but what really got me was how they seemed to enjoy the whole thing, how they seemed to take an immense amount of personal pleasure in causing us both as much pain and distress as was physically possible. It was like hearing Daryl's cries of pain was the funniest joke they'd ever heard, how the sight of his blood was the most fascinating, satisfying thing they'd ever seen, and it was then that it all came out. Like I said, you might have guessed what the deal was by now, but I pretty much had no idea back then. I was just so young and dumb. Daryl was a drug dealer and this was a robbery. So they beat the life out of him until he finally spoke up and told them where he kept his money in his stash. But I mean, for a while there, I thought they might have gotten the wrong place. Daryl flat out denied knowing what they were talking about and insisted that they got in the wrong place and how there was nothing to find there. But in the end, he broke and told them. They then took to clearing him out, and from what he told me, after he'd been discharged from the hospital for a fairly superficial gunshot wound to the shoulder, they'd taken him for about $20,000 plus. I had to cover Daryl's rent for a few months until he was well enough to get himself a real job. Turns out he was an actual college graduate with a business degree and was dealing in college to make a little money. When he graduated, the money came too easy that he just didn't bother to get a legit job. He wasn't a gangster. He just didn't have that kind of personality, which I suppose is what made him the perfect prey for the actual criminals that broke in that night. We got over what happened, but obviously Daryl still has this big old scar on his shoulder, a reminder of one of the worst nights of our lives, one that'll always be with us no matter where we go, or what we do, or who we become.
People say high school memories are to be cherished forever, but this particular memory has me scarred for life. Like every other high school teenager, I had a lot of friends. After school, I used to go out with them and have fun at the mall. There, I met Evan. Evan shifted to our locality with his stepdad. A friend of mine introduced us at the mall. Evan appeared as a very shy person. After the introduction at the mall, I saw Evan many times in school. We also had a Spanish class together. He used to sit in the corner of the class and watch me at times. At first, like every other girl, I thought that he might want to talk to me, but somehow fails to gather the courage. So, I asked him to join our group at lunch. My friends often teased him for his shy nature, but surprisingly, Evan never protested. I thought he wanted to stick in the group, so he was being down to earth. Within a few months, Evan became one of us, and we kept including him in our plans. One thing that surprised me is he never talked about himself or his family. I didn't want to interfere in his personal life, so I never asked him either. Being the last year of our high school graduation, everyone got really excited about the Halloween party. We all started to plan what clothes to wear and what games to play that night. We wanted to organize a party, especially for our group, and decided to ask our parents individually if we can arrange anyone's house for the party. A week before Halloween, I was discussing with my friends about the costume, just when I saw Evan entering the class. He looked a bit unorganized. His hair was all messy, and his clothes were wrinkled. I went to him and asked, "Hey, is everything fine?" He replied in a shaky voice, Yeah, all good." I knew something was wrong just when I noticed bruises on his wrist. I immediately asked him, "Oh my God, you were hurt. Did anyone do that to you?" I don't know why Evan reacted oddly. He stormed out of the class, saying, "Leave me alone." I felt a bit upset about his behavior and distanced myself a bit from him since that day. I thought he might have got into a fight or bullied by someone, which is why he is ashamed to open up about it. For the next 5 days, I didn't talk to Evan, and he didn't talk to me either. The next day, I was coming home after school when I saw Evan standing at the sidewalk in front of me. He was on his bicycle. I was pissed at him, so I tried to walk past him. He called me, and I had to stop. He then came to me and said, "I am sorry, Stacy. I was in a bad mood for a while. You have always been nice to me. Forgive me for being rude that day." I realized he meant it, and we sorted things out. He walked me home, too. On the day before Halloween, everyone was worried about our party venue, just when Evan surprised everyone and said, "My dad is going to be out of town. We can party at my house. I've decided to do some really spooky decorations for Halloween." No one expected this from him, hence Evan suddenly became the hero of the group. For a shy guy like him, getting so much attention at once made him even shyer. We all decided to show up at 7 p.m. at his house. Evan texted his house address in our group chat. As per the schedule, we all reached the venue at 7 p.m. It was a group of 8 people. Evan's house was in the outskirts of the town in a secluded area. The boys in our group got really excited that we can play loud music, as there's no scope of being bothered by the neighbor. I was amazed to see the decoration he put up. His house was actually looking spooky. There were fake cobwebs, spooky neon lights coming from pumpkin heads, spiders hanging from the ceiling, and the most exciting one was a fake mummy placed in the hallway, which made the Halloween party perfect. Everyone praised Evan for such realistic effects. I noticed how hard he had worked on making the mummy, and also to give it real effects. He has placed the mummy on a wooden box filled with ice. The smoke coming from the ice made the air around the house quite chilly. The party was on the swing. Everyone dressed in their unique Halloween costumes were dancing like maniacs. I went to Evan and told him, "Great decorations, Evan. This actually looks spooky. I love the mummy. It looks so real." He gave me a smile and said, "Yeah, my dad helped me a bit." I felt happy seeing him enjoy the party, just like every other normal teen. He was actually starting to open up, which made me feel good. After 2 hours of heavy partying, everyone got really drunk. I needed to pee, so I walked towards the hallway looking for the bathroom. As I reached near the mummy, I noticed there was a red fluid coming out of it, making the ice dark red in color. Evan might have seen me staring at it, so he came to me and said, "That's just some special effect. My dad fixed it up for me. Isn't it great?" I was fine at the time, but suddenly Evan talking about his dad too much made me a bit curious. I looked at him and said, "I thought you weren't that close to your dad, but it's good to see you opening up to us." The expression on his face suddenly changed. He gave me a very creepy stare. His eyes were wide, and his face turned red as if I had made him angry. He replied in a coarse voice, "Why would you think that I don't tag along with my dad? Just because I am his stepson?" I felt very offended by this remark and told him, "You need to relax a bit. I just made a passing comment. You get really weird sometimes." I started to walk away, and Evan suddenly grabbed my hand. "Isn't it enough for you? I arranged this party for you. What more do you want?" He grasped my hand so tightly that it started to ache. I cried and I said, "Leave my hand. What is wrong with you?" Just when a few of my friends grabbed him from behind to get him away from me. This entire collision resulted in a fight. Evan started beating a friend of mine severely and kept saying, "This is my Halloween party. You don't set the rules." I got really scared, and we ended up calling 911. The cops came and settled down everybody. They asked Evan to call his father and inform him about this entire incident. He broke one of my friend's nose, for which the cops sent him to the hospital. We all called our parents and informed them about the situation. But Evan just sat on the couch. He was silent like a statue. The cops told him, "Come on, call your dad. We need to talk to him, boy." Still, no answer came from him. Then a cop went close to him and said, "Listen, boy, if you don't call him, we will take you into custody, and you will stay behind bars for the entire night. I don't think you want that." This startled Evan, and he took out his phone and dialed his father's number. What happened next terrified me for my entire life. As he rang his father, a cell phone started to beep inside the house. We all were shook as Evan told us his father wasn't home. The cops searched the home and noticed the sound was coming from the box where the mummy was placed. In front of our eyes, they unleashed the horror. As they took off its bandages, we saw a man lying underneath. His head had a deep injury in the backside. Someone had hit him with a blunt, heavy object. I just realized that it was an actual dead person. All that so-called special effect was real blood dripping out of his head. Some of my friends started to vomit seeing this incident. We were taken out of the house by the cops. My parents came to get me. In front of our eyes, the cops took Evan in the police car. As he walked towards the car, he suddenly stopped and looked at me before getting inside. He then said, with a spice-chilling grin, "It was all for you, Stacy. No one has ever been this nice to me, not even my stepdad. That's why he got what he deserved." I fainted then and there. The next morning, when I woke up on my bed, my mom came in. She hugged me to her chest and said the cops have assured it was Evan's stepfather. He used to torture Evan and even hit him physically. Evan's bruised hand flashed in front of my eyes. Mom then said Evan will be sent to a mental institution for proper care and guidance. This incident shook our school drastically. I couldn't attend classes for another week. I was scared all the freaking time. The only thought that stuck to my head was that we all kept partying for almost 3 long hours in front of a dead person's corpse. But no one suspected the situation for a single second. I don't know where Evan is now. He has disappeared from my life. But sometimes, when I hear a bicycle ring nearby, my heart stops for a while. As much as I feel sorry for him, I can't deny the fact that I am extremely scared of him too. I never guessed I would end up attending a Halloween party, having a real corpse. I hate staying home alone. We just recently moved to our new house. My dad bought it in an auction. The house was better than our previous one. It had a big pool in the backyard and a small garden beside of it. There was a big tree in the garden which grew scented yellow flowers. The backyard is probably the only reason why I was excited to move into this house. The house was also close to my college, which was another great benefit. Both of my parents travel a lot, hence I am accustomed to staying by myself at home some nights. We had tight securities and alarms all around this new house too. There was no way one could break in without setting the alarm off, so I never had anything to worry about. At the back of our house, there stood an old 3-story apartment. I saw people on the first and ground floor, but the second floor felt like no one stays there. The second story's bedroom window was faced directly at the backside of our house. It was a calm and quiet community, so I kind of liked chilling while my parents are gone. One weekend, my parents were off to visit my sick aunt in LA. I stayed back at home like usual. It was a Saturday night, hence all my friends wanted to hang out at a friend's house. I promised my parents not to stay out late, so after a couple of beers, I came back home. It was 9 p.m., and I wasn't feeling sleepy at all. I went upstairs and got in my bathing suit and went for a swim in the pool. It was a hot summer night. I poured myself a glass of fresh orange juice and put on some music. I swam for some time, then I drank juice while lying on my pool raft and fell asleep eventually. Suddenly, I heard a noise. I woke up from my slumber. The backyard was all empty. No one was around. Just then, my eyes went to the second floor window of the nearby building. A frail, pale old woman was standing in front of the window looking directly at me. Her eyes were so big that her stare kind of freaked me out. I didn't say anything. I looked at my watch, and it was around 10 p.m. I kept on lying on my raft, thinking she would leave on her own. After a couple of minutes, when I looked back up, she was gone. I felt relieved and kept thinking to myself, how come I've never seen her from before? I always thought that no one lives in the second floor apartment. I heard my phone ringing inside the house, so I came out of the pool thinking it could be my parents. I went inside and closed the door behind me. As I walked to get my phone, I heard a whispering voice coming from behind, and I froze. It was an old woman's voice. I slowly looked around, and my heart drowned in horror. That old, creepy woman was standing behind me. I had no idea how she got into the house. Her wide, cold death stare made my legs numb. I couldn't walk away even though I wanted to so badly. I spoke in a broken voice. Ma'am? How did you get inside? She slightly opened her toothless mouth and said, Isabel, are you still here? Run away now, or your husband will come and bury you there. Then she lifted her weak, lean hand and pointed towards the tree in our garden with her long, creepy fingers. My blood turned to ice. I replied in a shaky voice, Oh my God! What are you saying? She didn't answer, just kept staring at the tree and then back to my face. Her mouth opened and eyes widened. It was such a horrible sight. Suddenly, my phone again rang, and I ran towards my room frantically this time. I got inside my room and locked the door. It was my dad. I answered the phone and started sobbing terribly. My dad got all freaked out and called 911 on my behalf. The cops came after 10 minutes. I was still in my room. I took my time and slowly approached the door. By this time, the old lady was gone. I told the cops everything. They immediately went to the building and asked a guy about the tenant on the second floor. It came out as a shock that the apartment is empty for the last 2 years. But the guy also said that an old lady used to live in the apartment back then. She was sick and bedridden, hence she spent most of the time of her days sitting near that window inside the dark room. Her children left her alone during her last days, and she even died sitting near that window. 2 cops stayed back with me that night. The next morning when my parents arrived, the cops told them I might have had a bad dream or something. While they were talking, something popped in my mind. I asked my dad what the name was for the previous owners of our house. He said the bank told him a woman lived with her husband in this house before we moved in. Her name was Isabel Monroe, and it was 2 years ago. Why are you asking? My dad added. My heart started to beat fast. I told them the old woman addressed me as Isabel and said her husband buried her under that tree. They all looked very surprised. The cops decided to check our backyard. When they dug under the tree, scaring the hell out of everyone, a skeleton of a full-grown woman got discovered from our garden. It had a ring on its left hand. My mom was completely paranoid, and so was me and my dad from the thought of knowing that a dead person was buried in the backyard without our knowledge. The cops investigated this matter, and they came to know that it was indeed the remains of the woman named Isabel. She went missing one night, and her husband filed a missing person report. But after filing that report, he too left town. Due to a lack of evidence, the police couldn't find any details about her. Also, no one came to interrogate about her. Her autopsy reports signified that she was murdered by a serious injury made with a blunt object on the back of her head. The cops suspect it was her husband who murdered her and buried her under that tree. They are still searching for her husband. I am very much sure that the old lady saw this entire incident from her room's window, but couldn't tell anyone. Even though people find it hard to believe, I think she came back to tell me about it. And I believe it was her ghost that I saw that night. But the question that kept eating my mind was, why me? This too got answered when the cops published Isabel's picture in the local newspaper, stating about this gruesome case. Isabel looks exactly like me. Or should I say, I look exactly like her. My parents are still in deep shock. I have no idea what to say. We are still living in this house, and I haven't seen that old lady ever again.
It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our home in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me at home for a few days. My mum had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever I was hungry, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza or something. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up until about 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1 p.m. I'd made plans to play some street hockey with a few friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes when I heard my back door open. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained in trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early. So I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. The bathroom is directly upstairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. So, the stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old as shit and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all of the 12 stairs. When I get to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner into the kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anyone in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have already heard another noise. And there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in the house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid, and just normally walked the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me, in the middle of the kitchen, is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. He's just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up and a little bit behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how fucking creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping, half pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob, like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911 and, nearly in tears, told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room in practically the fetal position, I noticed that the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The fucker was standing outside of my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying that the man would just go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone up to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there curled up, unable to even speak. Fear does funny things to the body. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened up the door to the 2 of them standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents never leave me home alone, thank God, and I check every lock on the house before going to bed. I still get nightmares occasionally, and my heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. But I'm doing alright. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found whoever the fuck was in my house. That sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling.
Under a lamp. One time, I received an invite to a website after chatting with some guy online. He told me it was something he thought I'd really like. Not really knowing what to expect, I followed the link. This was, as you probably expect, a mistake. The link took me to a site with just a video on it. The images were very poor quality and very grainy. In the video, there were 4 Chinese guys sat around a table in some crummy apartment. I'm pretty sure they were all drunk, and one of them was resting his head in his arms against the table. As the camera occasionally dipped downwards, you could see that the floor area beneath them was covered in a tarp. Nothing much else was happening. I wanted to skip forward because I was getting bored, but that's when I realized that you couldn't. This was a live stream. The guy who sent me the link said to keep waiting and just give it 5 minutes. So I popped open another tab whilst I waited and checked back on the stream every so often. At one point, when I clicked back on the video, there were only 3 of the men sat around the table, and a box had appeared above the video. The words in this text box were all in Chinese. I'm pretty sure it was Chinese at least. But I remember very distinctly that there were 4 boxes, each with numbers in them that kept changing. I didn't think much of that at first. Not long afterwards, the 4th guy returns to the table. He was now holding a revolver in his hands. He sat back down at the table with the other men and placed the gun on the table. You could hear the guy holding the camera saying something, but obviously I didn't understand what. He sounded very aggressive in his tone though. That's all I could really discern. Then there were a couple of other voices coming off camera chiming in too. The guy at the table who had brought the gun grunted something and spun the pistol on the table. That's when I realized this was a live game of Russian roulette for some sort of gambling website. People would stake their bitcoins on what I assume was a 4-to-1 bet. That's what the changing numbers were at the top of the screen. The Chinese characters must have referred to the different guys at the table, and I assume the changing numbers was the amount of cash being staked on each player. Whether the money wagered was for that man to live or die is something that I can't answer. It was like something out of the fucking Deer Hunter. I couldn't believe it. But these guys didn't look like they'd been captured and forced against their will to play. They just looked like tired businessmen. Maybe they were a group of desperados who really needed cash. Or maybe they really were forced, I don't really know. I should have stopped watching at that point. But I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. The guy who the gun ended up pointing at put it against his head and pulled the trigger. The chamber was empty, so he was okay. Then the next guy took the gun from him. He didn't even fucking hesitate to stick the gun in his mouth and pull the trigger. There was a brief flash. I don't know if anyone has seen the Bud Dwyer video, but it reminded me of that, in the sense that there was a fucking fountain of blood coming out of his head. One little detail I remember was a small amount of smoke rising out of the man's mouth and nostrils as he collapsed back in his chair. A couple of people from off camera came in and dragged him away in his chair. I turned that shit off immediately after seeing that. I don't know if that's a regular thing that happens on that site, or whether this was some type of one-off event that had somehow been advertised on the deep web to attract an audience. I do think about that video from time to time, along with a few other fucked up ones that I've seen. Like I said, this shit stays with you.